Wow, the NASA hotline is ringing off the hook. The call center operator is all sweaty from stress. They barely have time to answer the phone, and all the messages they get say the same thing. There's something glowing on the moon. Indeed, hundreds and thousands of amateur astronomers were watching the moon that night. And suddenly, there was a bright light on it, as if someone had lit a powerful spotlight on the surface. Scientists immediately began to look for an explanation to this phenomenon. They first thought it was simply the glow of an airplane flying between the observers and the moon. But then it wouldn't have been seen by so many people from different parts of the world at the same time. The next suspects were the Starlink satellites. Theoretically, one of them could have played a cruel trick on amateur astronomers. They could have mistaken the small satellite's light for a flash of light on the moon. But then again, if the satellite were the culprit of this mess, the flare wouldn't be static, but moving. While some scientists continue to search for an answer to this mystery, others decide to investigate the phenomenon in more detail. For this purpose, they have built a new telescope north of Seville, Spain. The conditions there are quite suitable for observing the moon. The telescope has 2 cameras, controlled remotely from the campus in Germany. If both cameras pick up any unusual phenomenon on the surface of the moon, it will quickly zoom the telescope there to see what's going on. It'll also require advanced artificial intelligence to teach the cameras to distinguish between the unexplained phenomenon on the moon and the light of an airplane, a satellite, or a small meteorite that just entered the Earth's atmosphere. While the telescope is doing its investigation, we already have a theory that may explain the appearance of such bright round flashes on the moon's surface. So, the moon influences the tides of the seas and oceans on Earth with its gravitational force. But the Earth can affect the moon in the same way. Only the force will be 32.5 times stronger. While the moon orbits the Earth, at one point it may be as close to our planet as possible. Then the force of the interaction will be greatest. At this point, tidal forces may force cracks in the surface of the moon to open and release gas from its interior. A powerful jet of gas will lift the lunar dust with it, and what we see as a bright flash through our telescopes is really just a fog of dust, which is round and reflects sunlight well. If you look at it from a distance, it really does look like a flash. As the dust rises, we think there's been a small explosion, and that flash gradually fades as the dust settles down. These things happen all the time on the moon's surface. They're called transient lunar phenomena, and besides lunar flashes, much more mystical and bizarre things have happened. Back in 1178, 5 monks claimed to have seen the moon, being in the shape of a horn, begin to split in 2 from an upper point. Then fire and sparks began to blaze from the place of separation. It was as if a dragon were spewing flames. In the next moment, the moon began to pulsate and then returned to its calm state. This phenomenon was repeated more than 10 times, and the flames took different shapes each time. When this nightmare was over, the moon turned black. It wasn't until the 20th century that scientists tried to explain the phenomenon. They theorized that a large asteroid collided with the moon at the time, and it was this asteroid that should be blamed for creating the Giordano Bruno crater, 15 Brooklyn bridges wide. But in that case, millions of tons of fragments from the asteroid would have hit the Earth as well, and then people would have seen an incredible meteor shower. It would have been very bright, and the memories of it would definitely have been in the archives. But that didn't happen. Now the phenomenon the monks observed seems questionable. Perhaps they did see an asteroid fall, only it was falling on the Earth itself, and they perceived the light from the burning meteorite as something sinister happening on the moon. Or maybe the monks were simply imagining things. There's no witnesses to this event other than them. Another unusual phenomenon is the blue and red lights on the moon. They can be seen when it's horn-shaped, and this occurs most often in the Aristarchus crater. The flashes come and go very quickly, almost like lightning. In fact, this is electricity. Tidal forces are to blame for this too. They cause mechanical stress to build up in the rocks. This can produce an electric field, which creates the blue flashes that have surprised many amateur astronomers. There can also be starbursts on the moon. We can blame this on meteorites that fall on the surface. Because the moon has no atmosphere, asteroids that approach it don't burn up. Having a lot of weight and speed, they cause an explosion on impact. And here on Earth, we see it as a starburst. For example, on May 13, 1972, there was a meteorite impact of 1,000 tons of TNT near where Apollo 14 landed. If we lived much earlier, we might have witnessed constant bright flashes on the moon's surface. All the craters there are formed by such meteor strikes. So imagine the fireworks that were there years ago. And a lot of those meteorites were even useful too. They brought water with them. Yes, there is water on the moon. NASA confirmed this fact after studies with the SOFIA telescope. It was mounted on an airplane. The observations were made from the upper atmosphere of the Earth. At such an altitude, the dry air allowed the telescope to see even the smallest details. Water might have been in the craters at the poles of the moon. These places have never seen light, and the water there might be encased in ice. But SOFIA found water on the sunlit surface of the moon. Of course, it's only H2O molecules that are present in the dust layers, but that's something. If we manage to collect all this water, we'll get very little of it. In comparison, the Sahara Desert has about 100 times more water than we found on the moon. But an even more unusual phenomenon is happening there right now. The moon is actually rusting, just like a piece of old metal. For rust to appear, we need iron, water, and oxygen. Lunar soil has enough iron in it, and as we've already learned, there's some water too. The last piece of the puzzle is oxygen. Everyone knows there's no atmosphere on the moon, and we can't breathe there, but oxygen is still present. The solar wind brought it there. The wind from our warm star moves at an extremely high speed. It scrapes oxygen from the upper parts of our atmosphere and carries it further through space. Eventually, the wind with the oxygen molecules reaches the moon. Voila! All the ingredients for corrosion are in place, and the iron ore on the surface of the moon begins to take on a reddish hue. If this process goes on long enough, in the distant future, the moon will look like Mars. It will turn orange-red. Yes, the signature color of Mars came exactly from that corrosion that began there thousands and thousands of years ago, when there were rivers and seas with water and an atmosphere with oxygen. Other strange objects that can be seen on the moon were left there by humans. Between 1969 and 1972, 12 people visited there as part of the Apollo program. In all, there were 6 landing sites where the astronauts left a bunch of stuff behind. Besides a couple of dozen satellites and spacecraft that fell or landed softly on the moon, there's a lunar rover, some United States flags, a family photo of one of the astronauts, and even 3 golf balls. And the first 2 people to be on the moon left behind a whole pile of stuff. When they were about to go home, they took a lot of soil samples and rocks with them. And to carry it all away, they had to get rid of everything unnecessary on board the lunar module. The TV camera, the sample collection tools, the science equipment, and even the armrests from the seats. The astronauts stood outside the lunar module for a full 8 minutes and threw out a whole mountain of unnecessary items. If you collect all these objects and debris that we left there by 12 astronauts and put them on the scales, it will show about 199 tons. It's like 3 heavy armored tanks or 3 large passenger planes. Strange, but true.
The moon's volcanoes are not dormant, and they can erupt any minute. For years, we lived knowing nothing about it, but now it's officially proven thanks to China's Chang'e 5 mission's shocking discovery. The lunar soil samples it brought back to Earth contained something absolutely unexpected, hinting that volcanic eruptions may have occurred on the moon as recently as 123 million years ago. Geologically, that's practically yesterday. But the big question is, are we safe down here on Earth? We've long known that the moon was once volcanically active due to the dark regions, lunar maria, on its surface. These maria, the dark plains that give the moon its characteristic markings, are ancient lava flows that date back to around 3 to 3.8 billion years ago. Until recently, scientists thought that those ancient flows marked the end of the moon's volcanic activity. But the Chang'e 5 mission brought back lunar soil that included several microscopic glass beads, and 3 of them in particular revealed an extraordinary story. They formed around 123 million years ago from volcanic eruptions. An uncertainty range is a mere 15 million years. The discovery of those tiny beads is super important because of their composition and rarity. Measuring between 20 to 400 microns, which is smaller than a grain of sand, these beads are volcanic in origin. And this fact sets them apart from most other lunar glass beads, which typically form due to meteor impacts. Impact events on the moon create glass by melting surface rock with incredible heat and pressure. The result is tiny glass beads scattered all over the landscape. Yet, the volcanic beads identified in Chang'e 5's sample were formed by magma erupting from beneath the moon's crust and cooling it into glass as it reached the surface. By using uranium-lead dating, which measures the decay of uranium into lead within the beads, scientists managed to pinpoint their age with striking accuracy. The results suggest that the last known volcanic activity on the moon happened within the past 200 million years, making it a recent event in the moon's long history. This discovery also aligns with prior observations of unusual surface features known as irregular mare patches. Those are smooth mounds surrounded by rocky terrain. They were first spotted by NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2014. These patches appear much younger than other lunar features, potentially formed by volcanic eruptions less than 100 million years ago. Before Chang'e 5's glass beads, these irregular mare patches were among the best evidence of recent volcanic activity on the moon. Yet, without confirmation, their origins remain uncertain. And now, the glass beads confirm volcanic action. The findings raise new questions about the moon's inner workings. In particular, how could it retain enough heat to sustain volcanic eruptions? We thought that the moon had cooled significantly after its formation 4.5 billion years ago, which made it volcanically inactive. And without tectonic activity or an atmosphere, the moon should have shed its internal heat long ago. Yet the beads suggest the possibility of some localized heat sources within the moon's mantle. Scientists think that heat-producing elements such as potassium and thorium might be creating small, warm pockets which generate enough heat to melt rock and trigger isolated volcanic eruptions. But wait, beyond rewriting the moon's history, this discovery adds an intriguing twist to ongoing studies of transient lunar phenomena. These sightings, often reported as ghostly glows or hazes by amateur astronomers, remain unconfirmed by scientific probes. Some experts just dismiss them as illusions caused by Earth's atmosphere. But if the moon has small pockets of volcanic or outgassing activity, TLP might have a real basis. Gases emitted from beneath the surface could explain such mysterious glows and possibly be a hint of residual volcanic action on the moon. Now, if volcanic activity still lingers on the moon, this might have exciting implications for future lunar missions. In the coming decades, astronauts might be able to use volcanic heat for generating power, melting ice into water, or even warming bases built into the frigid lunar surface. But recent geological discoveries aren't limited to Earth's natural satellite. We learn more about volcanic moons beyond our solar system too. The detection of a possibly volcanic exomoon orbiting exoplanet WASP-49b around 635 light-years away means that volcanic activity may be a common feature among moons. Up until now, Jupiter's moon, Io, held the title of the most volcanic body we know about. But researchers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory may have found a new candidate. This potential exomoon came to light when scientists observed a cloud of sodium gas around the exoplanet. But the thing is, sodium clouds are unusual in planetary atmospheres and can suggest volcanic activity. The sodium cloud near WASP-49b had a bizarre, unexpected behavior. It was moving erratically, shifting size, and occupying a space too large to be explained by the exoplanet's own atmosphere. Scientists thought the cloud could actually be generated by a volcanically active exomoon in orbit around WASP-49b. Volcanic moons like Io are known to release gases such as sulfur dioxide, sodium, and potassium, which form massive clouds around their parent planets. Io, for instance, regularly produces vast amounts of gas that form a cloud encircling Jupiter, up to 1,000 times the size of the gas giant itself. If something similar occurs near WASP-49b, the gas cloud could be a clue to volcanic activity on an exomoon orbiting the planet. Observations from the European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope in Chile seems to confirm this theory. The sodium cloud around WASP-49b is positioned high above the exoplanet's atmosphere and behaves in ways that don't match the exoplanet's 2.8 Earth day orbit. This could suggest that it originates from a separate body, likely a volcanically active moon. Additionally, WASP-49b and its host star consist primarily of hydrogen and helium, which makes the sodium cloud even more unusual. The observed rate of sodium release, over 220,000 pounds per second, can be a sign of an immensely powerful volcanic source. If scientists verify the existence of this exomoon, it would be the first discovery of a volcanic exomoon. Back in our solar system, Io remains the main space object, helping us understand volcanic moons. Recently, NASA's Juno spacecraft provided some of the closest images of Io since the Galileo mission over 25 years ago. Io's intense volcanic activity is caused by tidal heating, the result of the gravitational pull of Jupiter and nearby moons, like Europa. This tug-of-war generates immense friction within Io, producing heat that fuels continuous volcanic eruptions. One of Juno's most exciting recent findings was a new volcano that appeared just south of Io's equator. Juno's images show a large, complex volcanic region, approximately 111 by 111 miles in size. The craziest thing? It wasn't there when Galileo imaged the same spot in 1997. This new volcano formed near the previously known volcano Canehekele. Researchers say that this new volcanic structure is a great change that highlights the dynamic nature of Io's surface. Io's equatorial region is home to most of its volcanoes because of the concentrated tidal heating it experiences. The most powerful eruptions emit sulfurous gases and produce bright lava flows. They cover the moon in colorful, sulfur-rich deposits. JunoCam's image, taken from about 1,570 miles away, shows Io dramatically lit by sunlight reflected off Jupiter, and you can see a stunning view of its constantly changing volcanic surface. Despite these detailed observations, there are still many mysteries about Io's volcanism. Scientists are particularly curious about how tidal heating affects Io's interior, and whether it has a subsurface magma ocean. Plus, researchers try to understand what triggers different types of eruptions. For example, plumes versus lava flows, and how volcanic gases shape Io's surface and thin atmosphere. The study of volcanic moons from Io to the possible exomoon near WASP-49b sheds light on how tidal forces create volcanic activity in different moons. In icy moons like Europa, tidal heating sustains liquid oceans beneath the surface, creating potential habitats for life. But for Io without an ocean, the same forces instead generate powerful volcanic activity. Plus, if volcanic exomoons do exist, like the one possibly orbiting WASP-49b, we might soon discover more volcanic bodies across the galaxy.
What if our moon was hollow? Would we be able to hide inside in case some terrible catastrophe destroyed our home planet? Well, the supporters of the hollow moon theory believe that it's actually a real option. The hollow moon is a hypothesis claiming that Earth's moon is either completely hollow or has quite a lot of place inside. The thing is, the moon is less dense than Earth, and it seems to support the idea of its hollowness. But according to science, the reason is the fact that Earth's upper mantle and crust are less dense than the heavy iron core of our planet. Then, there's also the claim that the moon rings like a bell. For almost a decade, between 1969 and 1977, seismometers installed on the moon by the Apollo missions kept recording moonquakes. The moon was reported to be ringing like a bell during such quakes, especially shallow ones. On the 20th of November, 1969, Apollo 12 deliberately crashed the ascent stage of its lunar module into the surface of our natural satellite. According to NASA, after that, the ringing continued for almost an hour. This made some people argue that the moon must be hollow like a bell. Later, lunar seismology researched those shallow moonquakes and showed that they acted differently than quakes on our planet, mostly due to differences in type, texture, and density of the lunar and Earth's rock layers. The speed of sound waves in solids is determined by the medium's compressibility and density. No one has ever found any evidence of a large empty space inside the moon. And still, in 1970, Michael Vasson and Alexander Sherbakov suggested a hypothesis that the moon could be a spaceship designed by mysterious extraterrestrial beings. In 1965, writer Isaac Asimov made an observation that added fuel to the fire of conspiracy theories. He marveled at the sheer astronomical accident that the moon fits so snugly over the sun during total eclipses. The sun's greater distance makes up for the incomparably larger size of the star. As a result, it seems to us that the moon and the sun are the same size. The author added that there was no astronomical reason why the sun and the moon should fit so well. So since the 1970s, conspiracy theorists have been quoting Asimov's words about solar eclipses as evidence of the artificial origin of the moon. Mainstream astronomers disagree with such an interpretation, saying that the angular diameters of the moon and the sun don't perfectly match during eclipses. They vary by several percent over time. Many other pieces of evidence confirm that the moon is a solid body that formed after a planetoid crashed into Earth. In the past, scientists thought that the moon appeared after our rapidly spinning planet got rid of a good chunk of its mass. This idea was suggested in 1879 by George Darwin, the son of the very Charles Darwin, the famous biologist. This theory remained popular until the Apollo missions. Then, in 1925, Austrian geologist Otto Ampferer offered another idea, that Earth and the moon could have formed together from a primordial accretion disk, a rotating disk of dense gas and dust surrounding a young, newly formed star, and used to be a double system. The third theory stated that the moon could have once been a planetoid caught by the gravity of our planet. The modern explanation usually involves the giant impact hypothesis. According to it, a Mars-sized space body hit Earth and created a debris ring around our planet. In the end, this ring gathered into a single natural satellite, our moon. But getting back to the hollow moon theory, at the moment, there's no scientific evidence to support this hypothesis. Seismic observations and other data indicate that the moon has a solid interior with several layers, a thin crust, quite extensive mantle, and a dense core. These days, the idea of the hollow moon is considered to be a conspiracy theory.
Hey, wake up! Quick, listen to that. It's a 5-second FM signal coming from one of Jupiter's moons. You fumble for your phone and inform your colleagues. They freak out over the news and rush to the lab. You've been a scientist working with the Juno probe, exploring Jupiter for years. But this is the first time you've witnessed something so unusual. Ganymede is Jupiter's largest moon and the biggest moon in our solar system. If this space body didn't orbit around Jupiter, it would be classified as a planet. It's even bigger than Mercury and Pluto. What makes this moon stand out among others is the fact that it has its own magnetic field. The moon was born around 4.5 billion years ago. It means it's as old as Jupiter itself. This planet-sized space body takes 7 Earth days to orbit its planet. Everyone gathers at the laboratory, impatiently waiting for you to play the recording of the signal coming from space. Your colleagues get their game on, trying to figure out what the source of this mysterious sound is. Around 40% of Ganymede's surface is dark, with craters scattered around, and 60% is light-colored. There are formations that were probably caused by tectonic activity or the release of water from under the surface. Scientists managed to discover a thin layer of oxygen trapped in the moon's atmosphere. The temperatures there are super low, between -170 to -200 degrees Fahrenheit. There isn't much information about how the moon behaves or what chemical elements it hides inside. Some of your colleagues try to create the same conditions that existed when the sound was transmitted. For hours, they sit there waiting, but nothing. Maybe it was a fluke. You get to the control system and activate the Juno spacecraft. The main point of this mission is to observe Jupiter's gravity, magnetic fields, the atmosphere, and the planet's evolution. By the way, there's also some evidence that Jupiter's largest moon is evolving too. Since it has a magnetic field surrounding it, auroras pop up all the time. Those are glowing gas circling the moon's north and south poles. If life existed in such a place, it would probably be at the bottom of Ganymede's extremely salty ocean. For a long time, scientists thought that the sun was a crucial component to kickstart life. But now we know that there are organisms dwelling deep at the bottom of the oceans. Those are doing just fine without sunlight. The oceans of our planet are teeming with some of the most bizarre creatures of all shapes and sizes. Sea lilies live some 10,000 feet underwater. They got their name because they look like flowers, except they're not plants, but animals. Don't be fooled by their stems and leaves. Those are body parts equipped with nerve endings to detect food around them. Goblin sharks are probably some of the most weird-looking sharks that live at the bottom of the ocean. They can grow up to 12 feet long and have a very unusual snout. Now, take a look at the anglerfish. It has a bioluminescent blob on its head to attract prey and navigate its way around the dark ocean floor. It's a natural flashlight that never needs new batteries. It's only the females that have these flashlights, though. The blobfish is another bizarre animal living down there. It lives in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, 9,000 feet under the surface. Anyway, even though you asked everyone to keep the news confidential, it somehow leaks to the media and becomes a new trending topic. You get a call from a news agency. They say they want to interview you about this breakthrough that may prove life exists in outer space. The next day, you head down to the news station to talk about your discovery. You have a whole live studio audience watching your every move as you reach out to grab your glass of water. The crew scurries around doing some last-minute checkups before you're live on air. The makeup artist does some final brush-ups. The sound engineer asks you to test your mic once more. Several of the producers are sitting in the front seats. Bright lights are flooding the studio. The countdown begins. 3, 2, 1, and you're introduced. And the host asks you to explain what it was that you heard. You tell them about the Juno space probe orbiting Jupiter. After a couple of questions, the host finally brings up the most dreaded one. Might the mysterious sound be coming from another civilization? Everyone leans in, waiting for you to answer. You freeze, not knowing what to say. Even though the crushing pressure at the bottom of the ocean is 1,000 times stronger than at sea level, life still exists there. Algae, which is considered a delicacy in the ocean world, is off-menu for deep-sea creatures due to a lack of sunlight. Many of these bottom dwellers have to munch on leftovers instead. Those sink down there from the upper layers of the ocean. The freezing temperatures and the intense pressure have altered the cells of these creatures. This has made them more resilient than the average fish. Bacteria were developing their own ways of surviving. Studies show that they feed on certain gases and chemicals, like sulfur and carbon dioxide. Methane and hydrogen are released when tectonic plates move against each other, and some of these bacteria feast upon those gases too. Tardigrades, also known as water bears, are microscopic critters that can live and thrive in extreme conditions. You can find them in volcanoes, frozen glaciers, and even in the empty void of space, which means that some life forms might actually exist on Ganymede. You explain this to your audience. Then you mention that you don't have enough information to determine if it was another civilization or a natural phenomenon that produced the sound. This doesn't mean that the bottom of Ganymede's freezing oceans isn't teeming with its own bizarre and weird creatures. There might be some legendary beasts like the kraken or leviathan there, or weird glowing fish with two heads, a fish with tentacles and a large fin, giant crabs. The bacteria there might be as varied as our own. The plants, if they exist there, have to be strong enough to survive the sub-zero temperatures. The animals on Jupiter's largest moon could be as big as our blue whales or as tiny as plankton. After the interview, you head back to the lab to examine the records once more. On your way home, you see posters of yourself with captions like, "Are we not alone?" Hey, you've become a celebrity. Many people take pictures of you. You've been booked by other agencies for more interviews. Some science magazines even want to put you on the front cover as the Person of the Year. Every time you come to work, you wait for the sound to appear again. But nothing. You send a signal from the Juno probe, trying to make some sort of contact with whatever produced the sound. Nothing. That night, you pass out on your desk once more. Eureka moment wakes you up in the middle of the night. There might be something you've missed. You run the numbers again and realize that the answer was in front of you this whole time. It wasn't another civilization that produced this sound. The source was electrons. Every planet produces its own sound. It's created when charged particles from the solar wind and the planet's magnetosphere interact with one another. That's what happened on Ganymede. The electrons in its magnetic field, where the probe picked up the signal, were acting stranger than usual, and this amplified some irregular frequencies. You're embarrassed and spend the rest of your night making phone calls, telling your team the news. The agency that interviewed you releases a statement. They explain that other civilizations aren't trying to contact us. You sit back at your desk, waiting for the next big thing to happen. Europa is another of Jupiter's moons that may host life. It's made up of an iron core, a mantle, and a salty ocean, twice the volume of all the oceans on Earth. And just like Ganymede, the ocean lies under a water ice crust. Scientists claim that there might even be active volcanoes there, and some resilient bacteria may live there. With enough water, certain chemicals, and a source of energy, Europa could produce life. But it's unlikely that we'll find anything but tiny microbes. Have you ever seen the other side of the moon? I caught you. Of course not. But maybe you've seen it in photos. In that case, have you ever wondered why the two sides look so different? Well, let me tell you. We can't see the other side of the moon. People believe this is because the moon doesn't rotate around its axis. But this is not true. The moon does rotate. It just does it at the same rate as its orbital motion. This is a particular case of tidal locking called synchronous rotation. The first time we ever saw a far side was only in 1959, all thanks to the Soviet Lunar missions and later the US Apollo program. Now, when Luna 3 and other spacecraft transmitted the first far side images, they revealed a far more cratered hemisphere that looked more like Mercury or Jupiter's moon Callisto. It looked completely different from what we were used to, and that's when we learned how meh the other side is. No, seriously, just look at it. The near side can boast its thinner and smoother crust. These beautiful dark splotches are called lunar mare, the last remnants of ancient lava flows. And when I say ancient, I mean it. They're more than 3 billion years old. Meanwhile, the far side crust is thicker and crater-pocked. The lava flows had almost no effect on these impact craters. It's also devoid of any large-scale mare. Low-key looks like dried white cheese. To be honest, don't you agree that the nearby side is much more beautiful? Write your thoughts in the comments. So, only 50 years ago, we learned something about the apparent differences. But then the scientists discovered something weird. Both sides are different, even in the geochemical composition. And not only in this, our side was thinner than the far side by several miles. But where did such significant differences come from on an ordinary floating stone ball? For scientists, this was a mystery. They started coming up with a lot of theories. The melted moon theory was the main one for a while. It said that it was the Earth's fault that our moon looks like this. This happened several billion years ago. The moon was born because of a collision. One day, an object about the size of Mars crashed into the Earth. At that moment, a piece broke off from it, which later became the moon. However, this piece was somewhere 15 times closer to Earth than it is now. Some scientists created pictures of the so-called early moon. Unlike our cute little white ball, the early moon was a strange-looking, boiling scarlet ball. That piece didn't leave us after the separation. It became tidally locked very soon after. The Earth after the collision was still an incandescent nightmare, full of fire and lava. It was boiling at a temperature of 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And since the moon has always been turned toward us with one side, this side has melted down a little. This would explain why the moon's surface, the so-called mantle, is thinner on the near side than on the far side. During the boiling of the Earth, certain elements evaporated from it. They then settled on the moon. This would explain the difference in geochemical composition between the two sides. But there was a plot hole in this theory. If that's what happened, then where did rare foreign chemical elements come from, such as unusual isotopes of phosphorus, potassium, or tungsten? The nearby site is full of them, and they couldn't have come from the Earth. There were also other theories. Another one said that initially we had two teeny-tiny moons. Later they merged into a big one, hence the difference in their composition. But this theory sounds a bit crazy, and it has a plot hole too. For example, the transition between the two sides is way too soft. If our moon was actually two tiny moons, this transition would be more abrupt. So scientists were kind of at a loss on this one. But recently, they finally figured out what really happened to the moon, all thanks to NASA's Grail orbiters. They spent over a year whizzing around the moon, mapping it out, and studying its composition. Using this data, scientists have created around 360 computer simulations. They contain different impacting objects of many sizes traveling at different speeds. Scientists were comparing the results with our current moon. They tried to determine which result was the closest to what we have today. And so, they finally solved this 50-year-old mystery. The answer lies in a collision with a dwarf planet. This collision occurred 4.3 billion years ago. This huge object was slightly larger than Ceres. For those who don't know, Ceres is one of the dwarf planets of our solar system. Its diameter is 580 miles. You could say that one France or one Germany would fit into it. So, this giant object crashed into the moon, somewhere near the South Pole. This collision was so strong that it changed the image of the moon forever. It left a trail of 3,500 miles behind. It would take you 14 hours by plane to fly that distance. This crater covered the entire near side of the moon. It caused damage to the moon's mantle. It also created a so-called South Pole Aitken Base, or SPA basin. This is an impact crater and has a diameter of 1,600 miles, which is like adding one UK plus one Germany. It's important though. The formation of this basin was a defining event in the history of the moon, and it's the second largest impact crater in the solar system. The collision also caused a powerful hot wave to spread across the moon. This wave scattered over the remnants of those rare warm minerals scientists found on the nearby side. That's how our beautiful side became home to something called Procellarum creep terrain, or PKT for short. This is basically a compositional anomaly, a concentration of potassium, phosphorus, and other rare elements like thorium. You can say that those minerals are a gift to us from deep space. Anyway, there were many, and I mean many, collisions in the moon's history. All of them only deepened this already large crater. That's why the mantle on the near side was getting thinner and thinner with the years. Also, our gifted minerals gave off a lot of heat, so the mantle has melted a little bit more and more. Oops, this accidentally caused the moon's volcanoes to wake up. Volcanic activity has increased on the near side. Intense lava flows filled the old empty craters. Ta-da! And this is how the beautiful lunar mare was born. That's about how it all happened. All this information was found thanks to the researchers from Brown, Purdue, Stanford Universities, and NASA's JPL. The research was published by the Journal of Geophysical Research, Planets, so you can read about it in more detail if you're interested. There are still many things we need to learn about the moon. The highest priority is the return mission from the South Pole, the Aitken Basin. Samples brought from there will be used to determine the age of the moon, its history, and the nature of the crust and mantle more accurately. Another critical target is the Moscovians. This is the name of a large lava plain on the far side of the moon. Studying it will help us better understand the difference between the two sides, as well as tell us how the other side was formed. All this knowledge is significant for understanding the history of the moon, but it's also handy for space exploration in general. Scientists use the moon as a reference point to determine the age of other planets and entire worlds in space. The moon helps us determine the chronology of the life of the whole solar system. So, stay tuned for new exciting research and discoveries.
Count how many times the word moon is said in this video. Enjoy! There might be moons out there in space. These are moons orbiting other moons. Online, these fascinating hypothetical space objects have already been nicknamed submoons, grand moons, moonitos, moonates, and even maons. They might not exist in our solar system or any other. But some astronomers claim that the concept of a moon bringing up its own baby moon is quite plausible. The thing is, in all planetary systems we know about, natural satellites occur in a strict order. Planets orbit stars, and moons move around planets. But then, why can't submoons orbit moons? Take Earth's natural satellite. It's so massive that some astronomers even want to call it a planet in its own right. Then why shouldn't this planet-sized moon have its own satellite? In a new paper, a couple of researchers looked for a mathematical answer to the puzzle of moons. Using special equations created to show the tidal effects of planets on their moons, the scientists determined that submoons could exist if the host moon was massive enough and the submoon was small enough. Plus, there should be a wide orbital gap between these two moons and the host planet. This way, a 6-mile wide submoon could only survive moving around a 600-mile wide moon on a wide separation orbit. If these parameters are not met, the tidal forces of the host planet would be too powerful and would smash the moon and the moon together. Or these forces would be too weak to keep the submoon, and it would get jettisoned into space. Based on these conditions, there are quite a few natural satellites in our solar system that could hypothetically host baby moons of their own. These could be Saturn's moons Titan and Iapetus, Jupiter's satellite called Callisto, and our moon. Yes, our own moon could have its own tiny satellite. Why doesn't it? The researchers haven't found the answer to this question yet. The existence, or lack thereof, of moons may shed light on satellite formation and evolution in planetary systems. But once we find the answers we're looking for, the next logical question may arise. Can a moon have a moon of its own? If so, what name would be the most suitable for such a space body? A great grand moon? Write your variants in the comments. Besides hypothetical moons, there are loads of other bizarre things in the universe, the existence of which we haven't proven yet. Hypothetical nuclear pasta is one of them. If it does exist, nuclear pasta is the strongest material in the entire universe. It forms from the leftovers of extinguished stars when this substance gets squeezed into spaghetti-like tangles of material. It can theoretically break. But according to estimates, it could only happen if you applied 10 billion times the pressure you'd need to shatter steel. Then, there's dark matter and dark energy. We kinda know these things exist, but no one has seen them yet. everything on Earth and everything people can observe in space with the help of telescopes and other instruments is normal matter. It's made up of atoms and molecules and adds up to less than 5% of the universe. Almost 3/4 of the universe is dark energy. Astronomers wouldn't even know the thing existed if several decades ago they hadn't found out that the expansion of the universe wasn't slowing down. Quite the opposite. It was accelerating. It meant there had to be some enigmatic force that counteracted gravity. It was dubbed dark energy. As for about 27% of the remaining universe, it's believed that it's made up of dark matter. If dark energy is a force responsible for the expansion of the universe, dark matter is supposed to explain how objects work together. Potential candidates for dark matter vary from strange particles to super-dim objects. But even though astronomers can't grasp what exactly dark matter is, they know for sure what it isn't. It's dark, which means we can rule out visible stars and planets. It also can't be dark clouds of normal matter, otherwise, scientists would be able to detect it. Dark matter is not antimatter. Astronomers don't see unique gamma rays that appear when antimatter comes in contact with matter. And neither is dark matter gigantic, galaxy-sized black holes.
There's something happening inside the moon, something that nobody expected. Not a dramatic shift you'd see on the outside, but deep down, where things seem frozen in time, scientists have uncovered a hidden layer of what you could only call moon goo. Remember those school lessons about the crust, mantle, and core? Much like the Earth, the moon is made up of layers, a crust, mantle, and core. However, the moon's core is much smaller compared to ours. Earth's core is huge. It makes up about 1/3 of our entire planet's mass. The moon's core makes up only about 1 to 2% of its mass, and its diameter is about 1/5 the diameter of the moon itself. It's surrounded by a hard, rocky mantle, but it turns out that between these two layers, that mysterious goo layer, and it's way more important than you might think. The layer is soft and partially molten, ebbing and flowing like the tides in our oceans. It rises and falls, stretching and shifting as if it were alive. Its movement isn't chaotic, but subtle and regular. We always knew that the moon influences our seas and oceans, causing tides with its gravity. But it turns out that we influence it back. The goo ocean reacts to the gravitational dance between Earth and the Sun. Also, the molten layer could be made of ilmenite, a very intriguing material. Ilmenite is rich in titanium, a strong and lightweight metal that we really love over here on Earth. Titanium is used in everything from airplane parts and spacecraft to medical devices, even in everyday items like bikes and laptops, all because it's incredibly strong and very resistant to corrosion and heat. So, if the moon might have a molten layer rich in ilmenite, that would be awesome. Astronomers are already planning for lunar bases, and if we had a material to build structures, spacecraft, or even tools for astronauts right there, that would be a game changer. Otherwise, we'd need to transport materials from Earth, which is extremely costly. This is our first tangible sign that the moon is not just a cold, boring rock. Instead, it's dynamic, living, and breathing, with moving forces beneath the surface. NASA used new special tools to discover this: the Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory and the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. These are both space missions designed to study the moon, but they don't just look at the surface like a telescope. Instead, they help measure things we can't see with our eyes, like the moon's gravity and how it changes over time. Grail sent 2 small spacecraft around the moon named Ebb and Flow. Clever. The idea was for these spacecraft to fly close to each other and measure tiny differences in the moon's gravity as they go. It's like they were feeling the moon's invisible pull in different places. If the moon's gravity was stronger in one spot, the spacecraft moved closer together, and if it was weaker, they moved farther apart. This helps scientists understand what's going on inside the moon, even if they can't actually go there. And the spacecraft intentionally crashed into the moon in December 2012 to end the mission. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter is a bit different. It takes super detailed pictures of the moon and collects other important information about its surface. By combining the information from both GRAIL and LRO, we were able to find this goo layer. But this discovery actually challenges everything we thought we knew about lunar geology. How did this molten layer get there? How long has it existed? And perhaps more fascinating, how it stayed warm for millions of years? That's $1 million questions. The moon's core generates heat just like ours. But it's not as easy as saying, oh, the core's heat probably keeps it warm and molten. Well, first, the moon's core is much smaller and less active than Earth's, meaning it produces significantly less heat. Plus, the moon is much cooler than Earth in general. With temperature dropping to minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface, how could this inner layer still stay in this flowing state? That's still a mystery. In any case, this goo could actually explain a lot of stuff about the moon. For example, astronomers were exploring moonquakes and how they happen. Now they think that it might be this semi-molten layer shifting and moving beneath the surface. Now, beyond the moon itself, it also tells us more about other celestial bodies. If the moon, something we considered basically a huge static rock, has such a dramatic life, what about other planets, moons, or asteroids? Could they also hide similar hidden movements beneath their surfaces? We can even understand our own planet better, learn more about how tides and similar stuff works. There are so many great discoveries we've been making on the moon. Recently, we found some awesome stuff beneath the surface, massive caves hidden for millions of years. For over 50 years, scientists have suspected that the moon's surface is full of underground tunnels and caves. These are known as lava tubes because they were formed by lava. Duh! Millions of years ago, the moon was pretty unstable. It underwent some volcanic activity, causing eruptions. When a volcano erupts, lava can flow across the surface. As the outer layer of the lava cools and hardens, it forms a solid roof of dark material. It's actually what these famous dark spots on the moon are. These are dark, hardened remains of ancient lava. But the hot, molten lava continues to flow through the center. Once the eruption ends and the lava drains away, what's left behind is an empty hollow tunnel, hence a lava tube. On Earth, we have lava tubes in places like Hawaii or Iceland, where volcanic activity has created similar underground tunnels. The same thing happened on the Moon billions of years ago, although they're much crazier compared to ours. In fact, lunar lava tubes are now thought to be some of the largest and longest in the entire solar system. One such cave was discovered beneath the famous Mare Tranquilitas, the place where Apollo 11 first landed, and it's at least 340 feet deep. Now, all these lava systems have remained hidden just beneath the surface, untouched for millions of years. Only now they finally managed to prove their existence. Scientists from the University of Trento in Italy found them using special radar technology and advanced computer methods. These techniques let you see underground by sending radar waves. The waves bounce back and give clues about what's hidden underneath. By analyzing the way these waves reflected back, the researchers could detect the shape and size of the hidden caves. Now, the best thing about this discovery is that we could build all our bases there. These caves protect from radiation, harsh winds, and meteoroids. NASA even found evidence that some of these caves stay at a steady 63 degrees Fahrenheit. That's some crazy coziness for the moon. And on top of that, there could even be some water there. So humans could take shelter inside these natural tunnels and build entire colonies on the moon. And I know what you're thinking. Could unexpected lunar monsters hide deep in those caves? Well, sure. There's a huge potential for exploring these caves and finding some awesome stuff. But even if we manage to find a miracle, like small life or microbial organisms, there's a 99% chance that there won't be actual animals or monsters. It would just be impossible for them to develop in such conditions. But it would make a great horror movie. Researchers want to send robots or drones to explore the tunnels first, and then see if they're safe enough for humans. And it's not just the US getting in on the action. China is also investigating the possibility of using these moon caves as a future base, showing that the race to explore and settle the moon is heating up.
Some of the most terrifying conspiracy theories might actually be true. But which of them? Let's figure out. You might have heard about the conspiracy surrounding Project Sunshine, for example. A few decades ago, the US government started a study to measure the effects of nuclear fallout on the human body. And according to some people, authorities were stealing bodies to do radioactive testing. However eerie it sounds, it's partially the truth, but in reality, parts of dead bodies went missing. And because for the research they needed young tissue, they were looking for recently deceased children, and then took samples without notification or permission from the more than 1,500 grieving families. The next conspiracy claims that, during Prohibition, authorities poisoned alcohol to stop people from drinking. Strangely, the truth is even more somber. Even before Prohibition, industrial alcohol contained toxic chemicals. However, between 1926 and 1933, the government ordered manufacturers to add even more lethal substances to prevent bootleggers from turning it into drinkable alcohol. Have you heard about the idea that President Woodrow Wilson's stroke left him unable to govern, so his wife secretly took over? It's actually true. In 1919, Wilson had a severe stroke, which left him debilitated. The government kept the situation under wraps, and Edith Wilson controlled access to the president and made key decisions on his behalf. Basically, she effectively led the country for over a year. This conspiracy is outright creepy. It claims that the CIA experimented with LSD and other substances on unwitting Americans as part of a secret mind control project. Sadly, this was not just a rumor. MKUltra was a real CIA program. It started in the 1950s with volunteers, but soon escalated to dosing people without their knowledge. Some even suffered long-term psychological damage. Another outrageous conspiracy. The Dalai Lama worked with the CIA. Are you ready to find out the truth? During the 1960s, the CIA secretly sent financial support to the Tibetan resistance against China. Declassified documents confirm that the Dalai Lama received an annual stipend of $180,000 as part of this initiative. Now, do you believe that the FBI spied on John Lennon? Well, Lennon's outspoken opposition to the Vietnam War and his influence on the counterculture movement made him a target. The Nixon administration viewed him as a political threat, so the FBI indeed closely monitored him. But what about you? Could the government use technology to track you? Unfortunately, in the digital age, privacy concerns are very real. In 2016 alone, US agencies submitted nearly 50,000 data requests to Facebook, 28,000 to Google, and 9,000 to Apple. Mass surveillance is likely growing. Even webcams and smart devices could be used for monitoring. The next conspiracy goes like this. Tobacco companies were hiding the dangers of smoking for decades. Unfortunately, even in the 1950s, studies showed a clear link between smoking and lung cancer. However, tobacco companies worked to suppress this information, funding misleading research and marketing campaigns to downplay the risks. One of the most popular conspiracy theories claims that an extraterrestrial is buried in New Mexico. And guess what? The claim is partly true, but not in the way many think. In 1983, Atari's E.T. the Extraterrestrial video game flopped so badly that the company dumped thousands of unsold cartridges in a landfill in the New Mexico desert. This sparked urban legends about something more mysterious. The truth was only revealed when the site was excavated in 2014. And how about the Illuminati, a secret society controlling the world and having ties to the NSA? While many believe in the existence of a shadowy elite pulling the strings, the only proven connection between the Illuminati and the NSA is a digital coincidence. Typing Illuminati backward, Itanimuli, into a web browser redirects to the NSA's website. Most likely, this is the work of a prankster who purchased the domain. One of the most eerie conspiracies involves the Bohemian Grove, a secluded retreat in California, where influential figures from around the world gather annually. Today,
Powerful individuals meet there every July for what is officially described as a casual retreat. However, history suggests that significant discussions take place. The early ideas for the Manhattan Project, which led to the development of the American nuclear bomb, were conceived here. Security at Bohemian Grove is strict, and access is invitation only. Very few photographs of the gatherings exist since photography is prohibited. Women are traditionally not allowed to attend. There are reports of unusual ceremonies taking place around a massive owl statue at the site, but the true nature of these rituals remains unknown.
What if our moon was hollow? Would we be able to hide inside in case some terrible catastrophe destroyed our home planet? Well, the supporters of the hollow moon theory believe that it's actually a real option. The hollow moon is a hypothesis claiming that Earth's moon is either completely hollow or has quite a lot of place inside. The thing is, the moon is less dense than Earth, and it seems to support the idea of its hollowness. But according to science, the reason is the fact that Earth's upper mantle and crust are less dense than the heavy iron core of our planet. Then, there's also the claim that the moon rings like a bell. For almost a decade, between 1969 and 1977, seismometers installed on the moon by the Apollo missions kept recording moonquakes. The moon was reported to be ringing like a bell during such quakes, especially shallow ones. On the 20th of November, 1969, Apollo 12 deliberately crashed the ascent stage of its lunar module into the surface of our natural satellite. According to NASA, after that, the ringing continued for almost an hour. This made some people argue that the moon must be hollow like a bell. Later, lunar seismology researched those shallow moonquakes and showed that they acted differently than quakes on our planet, mostly due to differences in type, texture, and density of the lunar and Earth's rock layers. The speed of sound waves in solids is determined by the medium's compressibility and density. No one has ever found any evidence of a large empty space inside the moon. And still, in 1970, Michael Vasson and Alexander Sherbakov suggested a hypothesis that the moon could be a spaceship designed by mysterious extraterrestrial beings. In 1965, writer Isaac Asimov made an observation that added fuel to the fire of conspiracy theories. He marveled at the sheer astronomical accident that the moon fits so snugly over the sun during total eclipses. The sun's greater distance makes up for the incomparably larger size of the star. As a result, it seems to us that the moon and the sun are the same size. The author added that there was no astronomical reason why the sun and the moon should fit so well. So since the 1970s, conspiracy theorists have been quoting Asimov's words about solar eclipses as evidence of the artificial origin of the moon. Mainstream astronomers disagree with such an interpretation, saying that the angular diameters of the moon and the sun don't perfectly match during eclipses. They vary by several percent over time. Many other pieces of evidence confirm that the moon is a solid body that formed after a planetoid crashed into Earth. In the past, scientists thought that the moon appeared after our rapidly spinning planet got rid of a good chunk of its mass. This idea was suggested in 1879 by George Darwin, the son of the very Charles Darwin, the famous biologist. This theory remained popular until the Apollo missions. Then, in 1925, Austrian geologist Otto Ampferer offered another idea, that Earth and the moon could have formed together from a primordial accretion disk, a rotating disk of dense gas and dust surrounding a young, newly formed star, and used to be a double system. The third theory stated that the moon could have once been a planetoid caught by the gravity of our planet. The modern explanation usually involves the giant impact hypothesis. According to it, a Mars-sized space body hit Earth and created a debris ring around our planet. In the end, this ring gathered into a single natural satellite, our moon. But getting back to the hollow moon theory, at the moment, there's no scientific evidence to support this hypothesis. Seismic observations and other data indicate that the moon has a solid interior with several layers, a thin crust, quite extensive mantle, and a dense core. These days, the idea of the hollow moon is considered to be a conspiracy theory. Night enveloped the desert above Heraklion. A group of archaeologists moved through the labyrinth of sunken ruins, illuminating their path with powerful flashlights. Suddenly, one of the researchers, Dr. Martin Hale, stopped in front of a temple wall. He carefully brushed away a layer of sand and discovered a strange bas-relief. A woman holding a creature with an unusually elongated head and enormous eyes. "This can't just be a stylized depiction of an infant," whispered his colleague, Alice Carter. "The Paracas skulls in Peru have similar shapes. Could this be evidence of hybrids?" The question remained unanswered, but the mystery of Heraklion continued to intrigue scientists. Theories ranged from ancient cults to contacts with extraterrestrial civilizations. However, biologists established that elongated skulls could be the result of artificial cranial deformation, a practice common in ancient times. No DNA analysis has shown traces of non-human genetics. Meanwhile, in another part of the solar system, the Viking 1 probe transmitted an image to Earth of a rock formation on Mars resembling a human face. The photograph instantly became a sensation, fueling conspiracy theories. "It's just pareidolia," astronomers stated. "The human brain is wired to recognize familiar shapes in random forms." Decades later, when NASA sent more advanced spacecraft, images confirmed that the face on Mars was merely an ordinary hill, with shadows creating the illusion of facial features. However, proponents of the ancient Martian civilization theory insist that the truth is being concealed. No less mysterious are the artifacts of the Maya civilization. Their bas-reliefs depicting beings resembling astronauts, their complex astronomical calculations, and myths of gods descending from the heavens suggest possible contact with extraterrestrials. Some researchers associate Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, with alien beings. However, historians remind us that such imagery appears in many cultures and may carry purely symbolic meaning. In Scotland, on Arthur's Seat Hill, children stumbled upon 17 miniature wooden coffins with tiny figurines inside. The origin of these remains unresolved. Were they ritual offerings, connected to the murderers Burke and Hare, who sold their victims' bodies for medical research, or simply children's toys mistakenly perceived as something mystical? Some theories suggest they could have been a form of symbolic burial for souls who never received a proper grave. Others believe they were connected to an ancient superstition meant to ward off evil spirits. Another hypothesis suggests they were linked to an old Scottish practice of making talismans for protection against supernatural forces. The Antikythera mechanism found off the coast of Greece is another ancient enigma. This intricate device, over 2,000 years old, turned out to be an astronomical calculator ahead of its time. Studies revealed that the mechanism was used to calculate planetary movements and eclipses, proving the advanced knowledge of ancient Greek science. Many researchers now believe that similar devices might have existed, but no other examples have been discovered. Recent images from the Perseverance rover uncovered mysterious square structures on Mars. Geologists attribute them to natural crystallization and erosion processes, but UFO enthusiasts are convinced they are ruins of ancient constructions. The formations bear a striking resemblance to rectangular patterns seen in some ancient Earth structures, further fueling debates about potential past life on the Red Planet. In Germany, during excavations near Marburg Castle, students discovered a pocket sundial. The miniature device, several centuries old, amazed researchers with its precision and craftsmanship. Who owned it? Was it part of monastic heritage, used for prayers on a strict schedule? Experts believe that such sundials were rare and expensive, likely belonging to high-ranking individuals or scholars deeply engaged in astronomy and mathematics. Yet one of the most intriguing discoveries remains the Sabu disk, a 5,000-year-old artifact from Egypt. Its purpose remains debated. Some believe it was a ritual object, while others think it had a technical function, possibly part of an ancient machine. Some engineers speculate that its shape suggests it could have been part of a primitive flywheel or a component of an unknown mechanism. Certain studies suggest it could have been related to liquid movement or even served as a part of a lost mechanical system. Despite extensive research, its true function remains an enigma, adding to the ongoing fascination with the technological capabilities of early civilizations. The world is full of mysteries, Every solved enigma raises new questions. Were these artifacts merely the result of human ingenuity, or evidence of contact with forces we have yet to understand? As new discoveries emerge, the past continues to challenge our understanding, reminding us that history holds secrets waiting to be uncovered.
An air traffic controller registers a distress call from a commercial pilot. Another call, and one more. All of the calls report the same, an unidentified flying object. These alleged sightings happened between Saturday, December the 7th, and Sunday. Pilots were claiming they had seen numerous mysterious flying objects and lights over Eugene, Oregon. After Live8c.net, which broadcasts air traffic control transmissions, published the audio recordings of the pilots' reports, this news went viral on social media platforms. The Federal Aviation Administration confirmed the sightings a few days later. They said that a pilot had reported observing unidentified lights while flying in Seattle Air Route Traffic Control Center airspace. But at the same time, the FAA didn't confirm the authenticity of the audio, making the rounds on social media. Now, if you listen to the audio attentively, you'll find out that some object was registered by air traffic control collision avoidance systems. You can also hear air traffic control informing the pilot that no military activity had been happening in the area. At 8:39 p.m. on Saturday, a United Airlines pilot said on the transmission that the lights appeared just straight west of Eugene. They saw 3 or 4 of them. What shocked the United Flight 1596 pilot the most was that the lights were all altitudes up and down, which was pretty crazy. The National UFO Reporting Center also got a report, this time from a different pilot. He overheard the chatter over air traffic control channels while landing the plane. That pilot confirmed the sightings reported over Eugene around 8:40 p.m. Soon after that, the pilot of a medical evacuation aircraft under tail number N661LF joined the conversation, announcing they had just seen another light. It zipped toward the plane and then dashed back out toward the ocean. According to the pilot's statement, the light was red and moving at an extreme speed. After receiving all these reports, air traffic control realized they needed to act fast, so they started instructing the pilots to do everything they could to avoid a collision. They cleared the planes to maneuver as necessary, left or right, to steer clear of the UFO out there. Fast forward to the following Friday, December 13th. Life Flight Network issued the following statement. On Saturday evening, December 7th, during a routine flight near Eugene, Oregon, one of our crews observed an unusual moving light in the sky. We can confirm that it was one of our pilots on the ATC recording that has been widely distributed over the last couple of days. While the nature of the light remains unidentified, at no time did it pose any safety risk to our aircraft or crew. Neither Life Flight Network nor our crew, though, are speculating about the origin or nature of the light, and our focus remains on the safe and efficient operation of our services. But the main question remains, were those bizarre moving lights alien spaceships? Well, the UFO Reporting Center doesn't support this idea. They claim that sightings like these are common, but they probably don't involve extraterrestrials visiting us. They might actually be SpaceX's Starlink satellite internet constellation. The thing is, at first, Starlink satellites move in a perfectly straight line, and most pilots know what such bright lights are and can identify them. But when the satellites get to their destination point where they're supposed to get into their final orbits, they begin moving around, doing maneuvers. That's when they can form weird formations. Often, those are shaped as triangles. Plus, these satellites can move back and forth and create patterns. Honestly, they can look pretty eerie, and tons of pilots don't know about that. So, when Starlink satellites rise high into the sky, loads of pilots report them as UFOs.
Aliens have invaded Earth and they are not here for friendly interaction. It all begins with the detection of an extraterrestrial signal by the SETI network. This isn't just random space noise. This is a clear sign of an alien civilization. Once the information reaches world governments, rumors start circulating that aliens are on their way to Earth. The US, Russia, and China are the first to learn of the threat, but all governments try to keep the news secret, knowing that widespread panic could lead to catastrophic consequences. At first, nothing happens. Days turn into weeks, and skeptics begin to mock the very idea of an invasion. News channels call it a hoax, while conspiracy theorists claim it's a government distraction. People continue their daily routines, unaware that something is already approaching at an unimaginable speed. Then, without warning, they arrive. Their ships break through the atmosphere, not in a slow cinematic descent, but in an instantaneous burst of speed, defying human understanding of physics. The first crafts land in major cities across the globe: New York, Moscow, Beijing, London, Tokyo. Within hours, the entire planet is covered in their presence. Authorities still don't know who these beings are or what they want. Are they destructive creatures seeking Earth's resources? Or perhaps they want to expand their empire? Another theory emerges. Maybe these invaders are artificial intelligence created for space exploration, no longer dependent on planet conditions for survival. Attempts to communicate prove futile. Linguists, AI systems, and mathematicians fail to decipher their signals. Then comes the first attack. In one swift moment, a military base in Nevada is wiped off the map, leaving only a perfectly circular crater. The world realizes that this is not a peaceful encounter. The aliens begin their offensive, and it becomes clear that they are not here for diplomacy. Earth, rich in minerals, water, and other valuable resources, is an ideal target. Their technology far surpasses ours. Despite our best efforts to resist, our military stands no chance against their lasers, nanotech, and antimatter bombs. Even the United States, with its trillion-dollar military budget, can't match the alien technology. As they destroy key military bases and power infrastructure, the world is plunged into darkness and chaos. World powers begin to cooperate, but nuclear weapons are considered a last resort, knowing that using them could doom the planet. With cities in ruin and society unraveling, millions of civilians are forced to flee to remote areas, hoping to survive. Meanwhile, scientists scramble to understand alien technology, hoping to find ways to protect Earth or develop vaccines against possible biological threats. The global communication network is broken, and humanity is on the brink of collapse. The aliens continue their systematic destruction of Earth's defenses. Satellites are taken out, cutting off global surveillance. Drones and fighter jets fall from the sky like birds caught in a storm. Entire armies are reduced to ash in seconds. Panic spreads. Governments collapse. The world's leaders either go into hiding or perish in the initial wave of destruction. Civilization, as it was known, is no more. As time passes, the alien technology continues to overpower us. Our military forces are crushed, and our only hope now lies in guerrilla warfare by civilians. The United States, with its high number of privately owned firearms, may have a better chance than other nations, but it's still unlikely that we can withstand the alien onslaught. Small resistance groups form in hidden bunkers, underground tunnels, and abandoned cities. They communicate through salvaged radios, sharing whatever knowledge they have about the invaders. Some manage to take down individual alien soldiers, but their victories are short-lived. The aliens adapt quickly, learning from human tactics, neutralizing any newfound weaknesses. However, there's another possibility. Maybe the aliens aren't here to destroy us. There's a theory that such an advanced civilization might have evolved to be peaceful, having long overcome the destructive tendencies that lead to war. Another theory suggests that aliens might not need Earth's resources, as space is abundant with energy and rare minerals. Alternatively, they might just be studying us, like creatures in a zoo, observing our progress without interference. But reality sets in once more. The aliens proceed to the next stage of their plan, terraforming Earth. This could involve altering the atmosphere by releasing gases like methane or ammonia, slowly making the planet inhospitable for humans. They may also manipulate the oceans, changing their acidity or salinity, which would destroy marine life. To further reshape Earth, the aliens activate dormant volcanoes and trigger earthquakes around the globe, either to alter the planet's environment to their liking or to access resources more easily. As Earth becomes increasingly unstable, the aliens complete their conquest, and humanity's numbers dwindle. Those who remain are used for genetic experiments or research. Our bodies, brains, and memories might be studied or we could be wiped out altogether in a matter of days. Earth would be left a barren, lifeless rock drifting through space. However, perhaps the aliens aren't as hostile as we think. Maybe they don't want to conquer us, but instead just want to observe us, like we study animals in a zoo. Maybe, over time, they would want to cooperate with humanity and help us grow. Or perhaps, this is just the beginning of a new era for Earth.
It was the spring of 1900 when a group of Greek sponge divers got blown off course by a storm and came across a wreck of an ancient Roman ship. The vessel, which had sunk more than 2,000 years before, was literally loaded with treasures. A year later, a spectacular haul of antiquities was brought up to the surface. And among those precious items, there was something amazing. Divers found a startlingly complex cosmological calculator. It was one of the world's first analog computers, and it was made by the ancient Greeks between the 3rd and the 1st century BCE. It could track the phases of the moon and the position of the planets, but we can't give all the credit to the Greeks. Most scientists believe that their knowledge was based on the learning of a much earlier civilization. The ancient Babylonians were considered the first astronomers, and no wonder, they were enthusiastic stargazers. For example, around 6,000 years ago, they built watchtowers to scan the sky. And after mapping the stars and visible planets, they recorded their observations on clay tablets. Now, let me tell you about the most paradoxical thing. The observations made by the ancient Babylonians were extremely precise. They were the first known people to predict eclipses. They successfully calculated the length of a year. But their understanding of the cosmos? Oh boy, it was so different from ours. See for yourself. They imagined their world as an oyster surrounded by water. Their sky was a solid dome. Moisture sometimes seeped through this dome as rain. The waters from below sometimes broke through this dome in the form of natural springs. And every day, the sun, the moon, and the stars took part in a slow dance across the ceiling. They entered from the east and exited in the west. Now let's move on to another great nation, the ancient Egyptians. Their universe was rectangular, kinda box-like. At first, they believed the sky was a cow, with each of its feet planted at each corner of the rectangular earth. Later, they changed their mind. They started to compare the sky to a vaulted metal lid. The deities of the sun and moon sailed along the river, flowing upon an elevated gallery running around the inner walls of the box. Early Greek cosmology was no less exciting. Their world resembled a floating disk that was surrounded by Oceanus. That was a majestical mythical river encircling the world. But this theory was soon debunked. With time, the ancient Greeks started making tremendous advances in figuring out how the universe actually worked. Even better, they became the driving force behind the development of Western astronomy and science. If we speak about the solar system, in the past, there were two theories about what it looked like. The first one was called heliocentric. That's because the sun was considered to be the center of the known universe. Earth was believed to revolve around the sun once a year and rotate around its axis once a day. At least, this theory managed to correctly map all the planets known at that time in order of their distance from the sun. The other theory was known as the Earth-centered model of the universe. According to it, our planet was the center of the universe, and all other space bodies, including the sun, rotated around Earth. This model was around for about 1,400 years. It was toppled only in the 16th century. You might have heard that in the past, people believed that our planet was flat. Interestingly, this myth had already been debunked by the 5th century BCE. It was widely accepted that our planet was a sphere. Ancient astronomers watched lunar eclipses and observed the shadow our planet cast on the moon. It was clearly round, which made them conclude that Earth was a sphere. And still, despite some correct theories, the ideas of ancient civilizations about the world often seem somewhat funny and naive to us. On the other hand, guys, I guess the day will come when our descendants will start discussing our theories about space, and I bet they'll find them both ridiculous and amusing too.
How is the death of the universe possible if the universe is infinite? The concept of the universe's death is more about its state and less about its size or infiniteness. Several theories predict how the universe could end, but they often focus on the thermodynamic properties, energy distribution, and the fate of matter over time, rather than the universe ceasing to exist entirely. Here are a few scenarios based on current scientific understanding: heat death or the Big Freeze. This is the most widely accepted scenario, based on the second law of thermodynamics. Over trillions of years, it's theorized that the universe will reach a state of maximum entropy, where all energy is evenly distributed and no work can be performed. The universe would be cold and dead, with all stars burned out, and every bit of energy spread out thinly across an ever-expanding cosmos. Big Rip. This theory suggests that the expansion of the universe, driven by dark energy, could continue to accelerate indefinitely. Eventually, this acceleration would become so powerful that it would tear apart galaxies, stars, planets, and finally molecules and atoms themselves. Big Crunch. The opposite of the Big Bang, this theory proposes that the expansion of the universe could reverse, causing the universe to collapse back on itself into a singularity. This scenario is less favored now because observations suggest the universe's expansion is accelerating, not slowing down. Big Bounce. This theory combines aspects of the Big Crunch with the idea of cyclic universes. It suggests that after a big crunch, the universe could bounce back and start expanding again, potentially leading to an infinite cycle of universes being born, dying, and being reborn. The concept of an infinite universe doesn't contradict these scenarios because infinity here refers more to the spatial extent rather than its lifespan or the distribution of matter and energy within it. Even in an infinite universe, the distribution of energy can become so even that no meaningful activity can take place, leading to a death of sorts in terms of the universe's ability to host life or undergo change. How can energy be distributed uniformly in an infinite universe? If the universe is infinite, then there must be infinitely many regions where energy is not evenly distributed. The concept of energy being evenly distributed in an infinite universe indeed presents a paradox when taken at face value. The idea primarily stems from thermodynamics applied to a more understandable, finite model of the universe. However, applying these principles to an infinite universe requires some nuance: local versus global uniformity. In an infinite universe, energy could become evenly distributed on a local scale, within observable regions, rather than globally. The observable universe, the part we can see and measure, might reach a state of maximum entropy, where energy within this region is evenly spread out. Beyond our observable universe, conditions could vary wildly, but those variations would have no effect on the state of entropy within our observable limits. The horizon problem. This issue is also related to the cosmological horizon problem, which the theory of cosmic inflation addresses. The horizon problem questions how parts of the universe are too far apart to have exchanged light, or any information, since the Big Bang appears to be at the same temperature. Cosmic inflation theory suggests that the universe expanded exponentially in a very short time period after the Big Bang, smoothing out any initial irregularities over a vast region. In this context, an even distribution doesn't necessarily mean perfectly uniform across infinity, but sufficiently uniform within the observable universe due to its rapid early expansion. The role of dark energy. The current accelerated expansion of the universe, driven by dark energy, adds another layer of complexity. If dark energy continues to accelerate the universe's expansion, it could lead to scenarios like the Big Freeze or the Big Rip. In these cases, while locally, within our observable universe, energy might become more evenly distributed as stars burn out and matter spreads thin, the global picture across an infinite universe might be far more complicated and beyond our current understanding. Theoretical limits. The discussion of energy distribution in an infinite universe touches on the limits of our current theories. General relativity, quantum mechanics, and thermodynamics are all based on observations and experiments within the observable universe. Extrapolating these theories to an infinite cosmos involves assumptions that may not hold universally. In summary, when physicists talk about the universe reaching thermal equilibrium or heat death, They're often referring to the observable universe. The concept of an infinite universe introduces complexities that challenge our current understanding, suggesting that the true nature of the entire cosmos could be far more intricate than our local observations can reveal.
The United States Air Force came up with the term UFO, unidentified flying object, back in 1953, and over time, it's come to mean anything that might hint at aliens trying to contact us. There's an actual field called ufology, dedicated to studying these kinds of things. But there's an unexpected twist. The authorities don't really like the term UFO anymore. Instead, they've switched to calling them UAP, which stands for Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. It sure sounds more professional, doesn't it? It also kind of distances the term from decades of wild alien theories tied to UFOs. Now, if you're into UFOs or UAPs, this is actually a pretty exciting time. Back in December 2020, when the government passed a huge spending bill, there was a little clause tucked in there about UFOs. Basically, it called for more transparency and pushed agencies to share what they know. And shockingly, the CIA has recently dumped all of its declassified UFO documents online. That's 2,780 pages of material now available to the public, and you can find it all on a site called the Black Vault. It's run by John Greenewald Jr., a guy who's basically dedicated his life to collecting and sharing UFO-related info. But of course, getting those documents wasn't easy. Greenewald had to file over 10,000 Freedom of Information Act requests to pry them out of the government's hands. He says the whole process was like pulling teeth, and even now, the files aren't exactly user-friendly. They're in an outdated format, multi-page TIFF files, and the text scans are messy, making it hard to search through them. To help, Greenewald converted the whole collection into 713 PDFs. But even then, some of the documents were poorly photocopied, which made it tricky to dig into the details. Still, UFO fans have already uncovered some wild stuff. One document mentions a Bosnian fugitive claiming to have had contact with aliens. According to the document, at the time it was written, Radovan Karadzic remained alive, but the authorities didn't know where he was. The rumors of his near capture lacked evidence, and NATO countries blamed each other for failing to act. Critics saw the hunt for Karadzic as part of a political circus, with no real effort to bring him to justice. But the real question is whether they didn't want to, or just couldn't, because he wasn't on Earth anymore. Another document talks about mysterious explosions at midnight in a small Russian town. On the 12th of April, a powerful midnight explosion shook Sassovo, a small city in Russia's Ryazan region. The blast caused a lot of damage. It ripped off roofs, shattered windows, and rocked buildings like an earthquake. No one was seriously injured, but many people were shocked. Schools and kindergartens were closed, and buildings were temporarily patched with plastic sheeting. At the time when the document was written, the cause of the explosion was still a mystery. Theories ranged from buried World War II munitions, a falling air bomb, a meteorite, or a fiery UFO sighting reported by locals. Military experts suspected ammonium nitrate stored nearby, though this fertilizer had been safely used for years. A massive crater, 92 feet wide and 13 feet deep, was the only evidence of the disaster. One of the most intriguing finds is a 1970s document showing the Assistant Deputy Director for Science and Technology personally receiving some mysterious UFO-related info. But of course, like most government releases, a lot of the good stuff is blacked out. Greenewald still hopes and fights to get those redacted sections declassified. There must be something special about that information. As you see, digging into this data takes a lot of patience. You're basically wasting hours and hours of your life hoping to find something that stands out. But if you're still curious, check out the Black Vault. You might discover something mysterious and creepy in those thousands of pages.
Stonehenge took approximately 20 million man-hours to build. For comparison, an average human doesn't live much over 700,000 hours. This is Jack, one of the first builders of Stonehenge. Let's say Jack lived to be 80 years old, which is extremely improbable, but it makes it easier for me to crunch the numbers, thanks. If Jack had spent his entire life, from age 0 to age 80, working on the Stonehenge project, it would have required approximately 28.5 generations of people doing the same thing to complete it. That's next to impossible. To make it more plausible, let's multiply that by 2. After all, Jack wouldn't want to dedicate his entire life to moving stones, and he didn't live to be that old. Thus, we arrive at around 57 generations needed to build Stonehenge. That's not enough room on the screen for me to introduce John, Jack's great-great-great-great, you get the drift, grandson. So it all began around 5,000 years ago with just a simple circular earthen bank and ditch. Fast forward to around 26,000 BCE, and the builders replaced that initial structure with a complex arrangement of wooden posts and brought in around 80 dolerite bloom stones from Wales, which were rearranged at least 3 times. Then, a few hundred years later, they added those massive sarsen stones, each weighing around 25 tons. These enormous sandstone blocks were transported about 19 miles to create a continuous outer circle, with 5 trilithons, 2 upright stones topped with a lintel, forming a horseshoe shape inside. It was a millennium-long building process that demanded years of hard work. So, people must have lived nearby, right? But how would they have found shelter back then? Today, we have houses for builders on site, small accommodations that serve as temporary housing. But structures like this definitely didn't exist when Stonehenge was constructed, did they? Well, actually, they existed, and some recent archaeological digs near Stonehenge prove it. Archaeologists found this Stone Age eco-home, which is a huge deal since it's one of the earliest settlements in the area. This newly uncovered Mesolithic home dates back to around the year 4300 BCE. Let's take a closer look at this house, shall we? Now, for the walls, people back then used a large fallen tree, its trunk to be more precise. These wooden walls were reinforced with flint, and they even lined the pit left by the uprooted tree with cobblestones. To create the roof, they opted for animal hides, which sounds like a wise choice. They must have provided protection against the unpredictable weather of the British Isles. Now, you might be wondering, the weather in Britain is indeed unpredictable, and it has been that way since time immemorial. So, how did the builders manage throughout most of the year, particularly during the winter months? Well, the answer is simple. There was a hearth on site, which isn't surprising, but the system they employed was quite ingenious. A hearth inside the house would have posed too great a risk, yet bringing hot stones into the dwelling was perfectly safe. While they were hot, they couldn't ignite the building. So they used these stones from the hearth as a heat storage system to keep warm at night. And as a final touch, they even incorporated various stones for decoration. They didn't exactly get a Pinterest house, but it added a touch of elegance for sure. And if you think this discovery is merely about the houses, think again. It significantly changes our understanding of how people lived during that time. This discovery places them in an important prehistoric setting right at the start of the Neolithic area, sparking some interesting questions about whether these early folks could be related to the people who built Stonehenge. But there's a big worry. Experts are concerned that this significant find, along with other buried archaeological sites, could be at risk if the authorities go ahead with plans to build a tunnel to reroute the A303 away from the World Heritage Site. Sure thing the house the scientists found wasn't in perfect shape, and it lacked some crucial elements people use for living. Some of them decayed over time, while others were simply absent. So the scientists took 20 tons of chalk, 5,000 hazel rods, and 3 tons of straw, and used all this to recreate the 4,500-year-old design houses. These new buildings are located close to Stonehenge, which is incredible since in this area, planning permission for even a new cowshed is problematic. So, what are these houses like? Well, first off, there are 4 of them, and they're oval-shaped. They're built on the foundation of real houses that stood there about 4,500 years ago, just around the time the Stonehenge Eco House was going up. The houses aren't very big, they're single-room structures. When it comes to dimensions, it was straightforward to estimate since we could gauge the size of the roof and the height of the walls based on the foundations. Each side measures about 16 feet. However, the roof structure remains a bit of a mystery. There were a few differing thatching techniques back then, so pinpointing the exact method used for these dwellings is kind of a guessing game. For now, we think it involves knotted or tied straw carefully secured onto a hazel-woven frame. When fires are lit, the smoke from the hearth wafts up through the thatched roof. Now, remember those 20 tons of chalk? That was needed for the floors and walls. The white chalk walls and floors reflect sunlight and capture heat from the fire. But here's the kicker. The builders encountered a challenge because the ground was so waterlogged that some of the chalk floors took weeks to dry out. By the time they should have been bone dry, they were still as sticky as chewing gum. Now, it's safe to say people 4,500 years ago faced similar struggles, and we can really appreciate what they went through while building their homes. The final layer of daub was applied using rags, giving a smooth, almost shiny finish that looks surprisingly classy. The interiors are furnished with wooden and wicker beds and shelves, along with clay pots and jars, all centered around a cozy hearth. The spaces feel surprisingly roomy and are filled with light that streams in through the thatched roof, bouncing off those white walls. Plus, the woven furniture adds a nice touch of authenticity to the vibe. The fires have been lit, and the first meal, bread crafted from flour ground on a stone mill next to the hearth, has been prepared. Those who tried the bread were pleasantly surprised by its flavor, finding it quite tasty. Now, here comes the bummer. Those who recreated the houses did cheat a little. While the materials used were authentic, the tools weren't. They used cement mixers to mix the daub, wheelbarrows to transport the timber, and logs by the hearth were split with steel axes instead of stone ones. Still, the builders aren't professionals, they're volunteers. So I think a bit of cheating is totally cool in this case. There are other volunteers on site who are more than happy to chat about the daily activities of the Stonehenge builders, from grinding grain with a quern to making rope from rushes. But these houses and the Eco House aren't the only remarkable things in the Stonehenge area. Some years ago, archaeologists uncovered a burial site close to Stonehenge that predates the monument itself. This Neolithic long barrow, dating back approximately 56 to 5,700 years, likely contains the remains of some of Britain's earliest inhabitants. The burial site was identified through aerial images that revealed its distinct shape beneath the crops. Salisbury Plain is rich with ancient sites, including Stonehenge, various mounds, and monuments. The area has remained undisturbed over the centuries, which is likely why so many ancient structures are still intact. This discovery also shows a significant shift in human lifestyle during that era, marking a transition from a nomadic existence to settled farming and animal husbandry, much like the Eco House itself. The long barrow in question measures about 85 feet long and 65 feet wide, though much of its above-ground structure has been lost to farming over the years. If this site is like others in the vicinity, it contains the remains of 30 to 50 individuals, along with cow skulls, which were significant to those early communities.
A single brain filled with fake memories of having existed in our universe. Once, this brain just spontaneously formed in a void. Sounds like something from science fiction. But this brain could actually be me. Or you. There is an idea that such a brain is more probable than an entire universe that came about in the manner cosmologists think it did. And this phenomenon I'm talking about is known as a Boltzmann brain. Let's see. A brain is coming into existence in our vast universe right at this second. And everything in this brain is forming at this moment. The memories of its previous life, obviously fake, its origin, its ideas, and the perspective of the universe. But this brain perceives itself as real. In this case, how will it know that its memories are artificial and its existence is no more than an illusion? This is what the Boltzmann brain paradox is about. It's the result of Ludwig Boltzmann's debate with other scientists on the interpretation of entropy. According to the second law of thermodynamics, the entropy, or disorder of a system, can stay the same or increase, but it can never decrease. Have you ever seen shattered glass return to its previous state? Neither have I. But Boltzmann stated that even though the probability of the entropy of a system staying the same or increasing is high, it doesn't mean that the probability of the entropy decreasing equals 0. This chance is just so small that it can be ignored. But everything changes when we speak about some infinite system. If such a system, for example a universe, has an infinite number of particles, there must be at least one possibility that these particles create something structured. Let's take an infinitely old universe. Such a universe means an infinite number of possibilities where the entropy increases, and a tiny chance of its reduction when particles come together and form a structure instead of existing randomly. So Boltzmann took this idea of an infinitely old universe and ran with it. He claimed that at some point, all those randomly organized particles the universe contained could come together and form a structured system. Maybe this formation of a structure even led to the Big Bang. One more idea he suggested was of a local system existing in an infinitely large system. It could be a universe containing structure and life and existing in the infinite system of a dead multiverse. Such a multiverse would have no structure, which is what high entropy suggests. And since we know that in an infinite system, there can be only one possibility of entropy reduction. All other universes except one would be dead. Interestingly, Boltzmann said that we don't need an entire universe or even a galaxy to confirm the existence of structure in a dead multiverse. The only thing we need is just one intelligent observer. And what part of the body is responsible for consciousness and cognition? Right, the brain. It could be a single brain randomly existing somewhere in a high-entropy dead universe, containing memories of its entire life. Scientists had to admit the legitimacy of this paradox, and still, everyone was sure they could never be a Boltzmann brain. Everyone knew their existence was not artificial. But that's exactly what a Boltzmann brain would think. After all, it wouldn't know that its memories and existence are fake. This realization caused quite a commotion in the scientific world. People started to research the probability of one being a Boltzmann brain, and it turned out that the existence of a Boltzmann brain in an infinite universe is way higher than the probability of a human brain. Statistically, we are more likely to be Boltzmann brains than real breathing creatures. But it's too early to fall into an existential crisis. Sure, there's no way to find out whether you are a Boltzmann brain or not, but there's a catch. Do you remember that we've been talking about a Boltzmann brain in the context of a universe which has existed for an infinite amount of time? But our universe hasn't existed forever. On the other hand, what was there before the Big Bang? Nothing? Or a dead multiverse where all the particles came together and caused the Big Bang, which led to our structured universe? Sounds uncomfortably close to the description of the Boltzmann brain universe.
If the universe is everything, then there is nothing external for it to expand into. But we know for sure that it does expand. So the question is, what exactly is it expanding into? According to the theory of cosmic inflation, the universe was once filled with large amounts of energy. It was similar to hypothetical dark energy, but much greater in magnitude. It made the universe expand faster and faster. As a result, the universe was getting colder and emptier. And then, after growing this way for a very long, possibly infinite amount of time, most of this energy got converted into matter and radiation, which triggered the Big Bang. The Big Bang was the moment when the whole universe was squeezed into a tiny, super hot, and extremely dense ball we call a singularity. And all of a sudden, when it was less than 1 second old, this tiny ball started to unpack at speeds we can't even imagine. It was so hot that particles were moving extremely fast, crashing into one another and creating pairs with their opposites, like matter and antimatter. When the universe was 1/100th of a billionth of a trillionth of a second in age, it experienced an incredible burst of expansion that we know as inflation. At that moment, the universe doubled in size at the speed of light. And after that, it doubled in size at least 90 more times, growing from a subatomic-sized formation to a Gulf-sized structure almost instantly. After this burst of inflation, according to NASA, the growth of the universe continued, but it slowed down. As the universe kept expanding, it started to cool down, and matter formed. 1 second after the Big Bang, and the universe was already filled with neutrons, protons, electrons, anti-electrons, photons, and neutrinos. If we somehow managed to observe the universe when it was just a trillionth of a second old, we'd see that it was the size of Earth's orbit around the Sun. When the universe was a mere 1 second old, it was too hot for nuclear fusion to occur. At that time, its radius was just 10 light-years, which is enough to enclose the 9 nearest star systems we know about. When the universe was 1 year old, it was smaller than our home galaxy and unbelievably hot. Finally hot enough to start nuclear fusion. When the universe was 3 years old, it was roughly the size of the Milky Way galaxy. When matter started to dominate radiation, which happened when the universe was around 10,000 years old, the size of the universe was about 10 million light-years. It would be easy to think of the Big Bang and the resulting expanding universe as an ordinary explosion, where everything is expanding from a central point. But it's not a good analogy. There's a better one. Look at the surface of an inflating balloon. It'll be a two-dimensional equivalent of our three-dimensional universe. The balloon fabric will be space. These dots marked on its surface will represent galaxies. You see, they're moving apart as the balloon expands, but it happens only because the fabric, representing space itself, is expanding. The galaxies aren't moving on their own, and there's no central point for the expansion. The balloon is expanding into the third dimension, and that's where the analogy is getting trickier. Does it mean that our universe is expanding into some higher dimension? If there's no larger multiverse and our universe is all there is, then there's nothing outside of it. Not even a vacuum, which is still part of space. It means there's no point in asking what the universe expands into. If there was a two-dimensional being on the surface of our expanding balloon, they would be able to observe all distances in its surface 2D world getting larger. But they wouldn't see the third dimension into which the balloon is expanding. The same goes for us, three-dimensional creatures. We see the distances between galaxies growing, meaning the inflation of space, but we can't perceive additional space dimensions into which the expansion is moving beyond our three. Even if space is indeed expanding into some higher dimension, our current knowledge of physics doesn't allow us to find out anything about it. It's likely to be beyond our comprehension. Since 2007, astronomers have been receiving super-strong and ultra-bright radio signals that last just a few milliseconds. Such mysterious flashes are called fast radio bursts. They seem to be coming from billions of light-years away. Not so long ago, researchers were lucky enough to capture a repeating radio burst that flashed 6 times in a row. Who knows? It might help us crack the puzzle of these signals. But hold on. It's just the first mystery on our list. If nuclear pasta does exist, it's the strongest material in the entire universe. Formed from the leftovers of extinguished stars, this substance is squeezed into spaghetti-like tangles of material. It can break, but only after you apply 10 billion times the pressure needed to shatter steel. That single, high-energy neutrino that hit Earth in 2017 wasn't extraordinary on its own. Scientists observe such neutrinos at least once a month. But it was the first one to arrive, carrying so much information about its origin that astronomers could actually point their telescopes in the direction it had come from. They found out that the neutrino had been flung at our planet around 4 billion years ago by a flaring blazar, a supermassive black hole at the center of a galaxy. Saturn's moon Hyperion is one of the most bizarre-looking moons in the solar system, but its appearance isn't the strangest thing about it. This pumice stone-like rock, pockmarked with countless craters, is also charged with static electricity which is flowing out into space. Lost in space and drifting through galaxies, rogue planets were once flung away from their parent stars. But one of them, 200 light-years away from Earth, is different from the rest. It's a planet-sized object with a magnetic field 200 times stronger than that of Jupiter. This field is so powerful that it generates flashing auroras illuminating the planet's atmosphere. When a team of astronomers at Louisiana State University first spotted this star, they were totally baffled. The object, nicknamed Tabby's star, dipped in brightness at irregular intervals and for odd periods of time. Sometimes the difference in brightness reached 22%. Could it be due to the activity of some alien megastructure? Unlikely. The main theory claims that the star is surrounded by an abnormal ring of dust, which causes the darkening. Declassifying galaxy is as big as the Milky Way, but it's nearly invisible because its stars are spread out incredibly thinly. But what makes the galaxy so unique is that it's sitting all alone. Unlike other galaxies of this kind, which are usually found in clusters. It can mean that Declassifying was formed in a different era, probably a mere 1 billion years after the Big Bang. If it's true, the galaxy is a real living fossil. Massive objects curve light so much that it can distort the images of objects behind them. When astronomers used the Hubble Space Telescope to detect a quasar from the early universe, they used their discovery to calculate the expansion rate of the universe. Strangely, they discovered that, currently, it was much faster than it used to be. That finding contradicted other measurements. We still don't know if our theories are wrong or if something bizarre is going on in our universe. Neutron stars are ultra-dense collapsed cores of giant stars. They usually emit X-rays or radio waves. But in 2018, astronomers discovered a weird stream of infrared light. It seemed to be coming from a neutron star 800 light-years away from our planet. This signal was probably generated by a disk of dust surrounding the star. But this theory hasn't been proven yet. Haumea, a dwarf planet orbiting in the Kuiper Belt, has a bizarre, elongated shape and 2 moons. The day on this planet lasts 4 hours, making it the fastest spinning big object in our solar system. But the most enigmatic thing about Haumea is that the planet has a thin 40-mile-wide ring circling it. Dark matter is believed to make up 85% of the universe, and researchers used to be sure it was everywhere. But in March 2018, a team of scientists discovered a peculiar galaxy that seemed to contain little to no dark matter. Later, though, it was proven that this space oddity did, in fact, contain dark matter. Moons orbiting other moons might exist, or they might not. Astronomers haven't agreed on this yet. Planets orbit stars, moons orbit planets, then why can't there be moons, also known as submoons, moonets, and muons? Researchers claim that moons could exist. But the host moon has to be massive enough, the moon small enough, and there must be a wide gulf between these moons and the host planet.
Strange and amazing items are discovered often, but figuring out what our ancestors were up to is pretty tough. Especially when all you have are just some rusty cups and cave drawings. It's no surprise that even the experts in lab coats sometimes make mistakes. But it's not just about dusty plates and huge stones. Sometimes there's even humans with large heads. So grab your digging tools and let's travel back to ancient times to explore incredible societies that even scientists can't fully explain. Sardinia may look idyllic now, but I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't fancy visiting it 3,000 years ago. Rumor has it, terrible giants roamed around this island back then. People even talk about finding human skeletons over 13 feet tall there, although nobody's ever shown anything to prove it. But the stories will make you wonder because some weird stuff has definitely happened. In 1974, over 5,000 pieces of broken stone artifacts were found in a part of the island called Monte Prama, but instead of being displayed in a museum, they were locked up in an underground vault for about 30 years. Sounds a bit suspicious, doesn't it? When they were finally displaced in 2005, scientists put the pieces together to find statues of 38 giant men standing 8 feet tall. Not quite as tall as the legendary skeletons, but still pretty huge. It's thought these statues were made by the Nuragic people, who lived on the island a long time ago. Besides giant statues, they also built over 8,000 massive stone buildings. Perhaps Nuragic weren't giants themselves, but they definitely liked their things big. I do too. I like a big number of likes on our videos. That would be pretty great. Thank you if you liked this and subscribed. Now back to the video. You and I are pretty smart, but we might not be the smartest humans ever. Actually, we might not even be the smartest species. Since 1913, some skull fossils found in South Africa have hinted at a possibly smarter contender called Boskop Man. This human-like species might have lived as recently as 10,000 years ago. Their skull suggests they had really big heads, which means their brains could have been 30% bigger than ours. Wow! Their average IQ could have been around 149, making them among the smartest 0.05% of people today. But if a boss-cop brainiac was so much smarter, why are they not around and we are? Well, bigger isn't always better, you know. Our brains are a lot bigger than our ape relatives, mainly in the prefrontal cortex. This part helps with high-level tasks like making decisions, remembering things short-term, and being aware of ourselves. The parts of the brain that handle our senses and movements haven't really grown much. So, maybe the boss cops spent too much time dwelling on the past rather than doing practical things like hunting. But this is all just guessing. We really don't know what happened to these clever cousins of ours. Some people even argue that boss cops weren't any different from us, with the only evidence being parts of skulls. The jungle is huge. Did you know the Amazon rainforest is home to about 30% of all the world's plant and animal species? That's impressive. However, the history of one native species, humans, has long puzzled scientists. The mysterious Kasarabe people lived here for hundreds of years and then vanished around 1400 AD. People thought the Amazon only had a few scattered tribes, but recently we discovered big, unusual shapes in the ground called geoglyphs. These might look like simple shallow ditches, but they're actually the remains of a vast civilization that spread over 5,000 square miles and includes about 450 markings, some as wide as 1,300 feet. That's insane! They likely contained ceremonial buildings and could have hosted up to 1 million people as recently as 550 years ago. Thanks to new technology like LiDAR, which uses a safe laser to map the forest without harming it, we can explore deeper. In 2019, some scans showed miles of raised roads and pathways and even pyramids over 70 feet tall. They found 26 separate settlements, 2 of which were at least 250 acres each. Damn, that's like 330 soccer fields. It's not certain what happened to the Kasarabe people. Maybe European conquistadors drove them out. Maybe the most baffling ancient civilization is one we've never actually found a trace of. Yep, I'm talking about Atlantis, the grand city that supposedly sank into the ocean. The first mentions of Atlantis come from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who talked about a great city near the Strait of Gibraltar. But for ages, everyone just thought Plato made up Atlantis as a perfect version of his own Athens. So why, about 12,000 years after it supposedly vanished, do we still wonder if it might be real? Well, in the 19th century, U.S. Congressman Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book giving 13 reasons why he thought Atlantis was more than just a myth. Then, in 1965, some folks thought they actually found Atlantis when they discovered the Richat structure, a massive 25-mile-wide dome in Mauritania, Africa. It's so big that you can see the whole thing from space. 2 astronauts flying over the Sahara Desert spotted this giant eye staring back at them and thought they'd made the discovery of a lifetime. Unfortunately, there's no solid evidence linking this structure to Atlantis. It's believed to have formed from volcanic activity about 100 million years ago. But it does look suspicious, doesn't it? Still, we're no closer to knowing the truth. Imagine going back to about 3,300 BCE and finding yourself in South Asia. Welcome to the Harappan civilization. These people were way ahead of their time. They had cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, complete with baked brick houses, sophisticated drainage systems, and even public baths. This place might have had over 5 million people, making it one of the densest regions at the time. They also invented a system of standardized weights that was incredibly useful for traders. And trading they did. These people had connections stretching all the way to the Middle East, thanks to their great skills in metallurgy. They even had a form of ancient branding. The seals were used to stamp clay on tray goods. Despite being so advanced with a thriving urban life, there's a whole bunch of mystery shrouding their language and script. We've got bits and pieces of their writing, but no one's deciphered them yet, even with all the technology we have today. We also still don't know how exactly their society worked. It looks like they didn't flaunt their social status as much as other civilizations. No grand palaces or massive monuments. Instead, their largest buildings might have been granaries. They sure were practical. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Around 1800 BCE, this bustling civilization started to decline, possibly due to shifts in river patterns. As the environment changed, the Harappans packed up, moving towards more hospitable lands. Ever heard of the Minotaur? The beast with a bull's head and a man's body, hunting the bravest travelers in a massive maze. Well, this wasn't just any old tale. It was one of the most popular dramas of the ancient world, and it was inspired by this place, the island of Crete. The Minoans lived here during the Bronze Age. They had stunning palaces, amazing frescoes, and a culture so rich it still fascinates historians to this day. They built places like Knossos, which was so complex with its multi-story buildings and elaborate hallways that it might have inspired the whole labyrinth myth. Their engineering was so ahead of its time that even their drainage systems were more advanced than what many of us have today. Let me know in the comments which of these stories you find the most fascinating, and thanks for watching.
It was the year 2015 when U.S. Navy pilots flying training missions off the East Coast saw something truly eerie. They spotted oval-shaped objects moving quickly over the water. They seemed to rotate as they flew. At first, the pilots thought it was just one object, but soon they realized there were many of them, moving in unusual ways. These objects didn't look like normal aircraft. They didn't have visible engines, didn't produce exhaust, and didn't just hover near the sea like helicopters would. Some of them appeared at altitudes of 30,000 feet and were moving faster than the speed of sound. The strangest and scariest thing? The pilots had been observing similar objects almost every day for months. Mind you, those weren't rookie pilots. One of them was an experienced pilot with 10 years in the Navy. He, along with his fellow pilots, knew what typical aircraft looked like and how to stay calm under pressure. It wasn't until 2019 that the public heard about those sightings. That's when the New York Times published an article revealing them. The article included video footage taken by the pilots' plane cameras, which was later confirmed by the US Navy in April 2020. The Navy officially released the videos soon after. In recent years, sightings of UFOs, now called unexplained aerial phenomena, have been reported by other reliable sources as well. The US government has started to take these sightings seriously and has even brought in scientists to quietly investigate what might be behind them. So far, we still don't know exactly what the pilots and others have seen. But this growing scientific interest is pushing us closer to finding out more. While military pilots reporting UFOs might be a recent development, the public has been observing and reporting them for decades. In fact, the UFO craze in the US can be traced back to the summer of 1947. On June 14th of that year, a rancher discovered strange debris on his land near Roswell, New Mexico. At first, he thought it was from a kite. But even after looking through the bits of rubber, tinfoil, paper, and wood, he still couldn't make sense of it. The rancher then told the local sheriff about his find, and since his ranch was close to the Roswell Army airfield, the sheriff reported it to the military. Officers came to check it out, and couldn't identify the wreckage either. The next day, the Army issued a press release saying that they had recovered the remains of a flying saucer. The local newspaper even ran a headline, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell." But just a few days later, the Army changed its story, claiming the debris was from a weather balloon. By then, though, the excitement over UFOs had already sparked, and UFO fever spread across the nation. Now, UFOs are real, in the sense that people have indeed seen objects they can't identify in the sky. But when people ask, "Are UFOs real?" they usually mean, "Are we being visited by aliens?" And science doesn't have an answer to that yet. After the Roswell incident, UFO sightings became more frequent. People made wild claims, saying they'd met aliens or even been abducted. These stories were mysterious and captivating. No wonder they gained traction. The government didn't help much since it was keeping its own secrets. Eventually, they admitted to hiding something, but it wasn't little green men from other planets. In 1995, the Air Force released a report explaining that the debris found on Brazel's ranch wasn't from a weather balloon, but from Project Mogul, a secret Cold War program that used balloons to detect missile launches of certain countries. As for the alien bodies people claim to have seen, they were crash test dummies used in experiments with ejection seats. In 2021, the US government released a brief report on UAPs, aka unexplained aerial phenomena, stating that they have found no evidence of aliens. At the same time, they acknowledged that many UAP sightings had been recorded since 2004, and those remained unexplained. According to the report, those sightings did not necessarily point to alien spacecraft. Some could be birds, debris like party balloons, secret military projects, or even new technology from other countries. In May 2022, Congress held a public hearing on UFOs, and high-ranking military officials testified there. They revealed that since 2021, 400 unexplained sightings had been documented, but none suggested extraterrestrial life. At the same time, there's more and more evidence hinting that Earth may not be the only place with life in the universe. Earth itself is 4.5 billion years old, and life emerged here around 3.5 to 4 billion years ago. Life on Earth began fairly quickly, which means that the process of life forming wasn't overly difficult. And if life could begin easily on Earth, it's likely that it could also start on many other planets in the universe. The Milky Way galaxy alone contains 1 trillion planets, and there may be trillions more in the universe. Given these numbers, there is a lot of potential for life elsewhere. However, just because there's a possibility of life elsewhere doesn't necessarily mean that aliens have visited Earth. That's why SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence researchers, are focused on detecting signs of life elsewhere in the universe, not on studying UFOs. For a long time, most scientists dismissed the study of UFOs as pseudoscience. That's why many researchers interested in UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, stayed silent to avoid being seen as eccentric. But this has started to change. In June 2022, NASA created a team of scientific experts to search for the unknown in air and space. The researchers suggested using NASA's huge amount of space data to assist in the study of UAPs. The team also made it clear that studies of UAPs should focus on evidence and data, not speculation. Instead of simply collecting stories or relying on accidental sightings, the researchers used telescopes to capture footage of the sky. They gather this data and then analyze it with the help of artificial intelligence. They plan to add more observatories, and over 100 scientists are already involved. Astrobiologist Julia DeMarines suggests that some UAP sightings could be caused by unusual weather conditions. For instance, spacecraft launched near sunset can create strange effects. The gases expelled by spacecraft reflect only the light reaching the upper atmosphere at that time. And since the sunlight remains reflective for a long period, such sightings can seem unexplainable. UAPs might also be caused by light reflecting off communication satellites. But could UAPs really be alien spaceships? People often expect first contact with alien life to be dramatic, but the reality might be more subtle. Our first encounter with alien life may actually be discovering their technology. For example, we might find a piece of space debris that didn't originate on Earth, like spotting an empty plastic bag blowing through space. We'd know it didn't come from Earth, but we wouldn't know where it came from. Another possibility is that the aliens we might encounter may no longer exist. In 1961, astronomer Frank Drake developed the Drake equation, which estimates how many alien civilizations might be capable of sending signals. The equation considers factors like the rate at which stars form and the number of planets capable of supporting life in a Goldilocks zone, a habitable zone located at the right distance from a star for water to remain a liquid. However, one key factor in the equation is represented by L, which stands for the length of time technological civilizations produce detectable signs of their existence. Humanity has only been technologically advanced for a little over 100 years, in a universe that is nearly 14 billion years old. It means that the timing for civilizations to overlap might be rare. Many civilizations might have existed before us, and many may come after us, but the chance that we overlap with theirs is slim. Despite this, some scientists believe that it won't be long before we find definitive evidence of alien life.
Today, we're traveling to the ancient city of Abydos, within the famed temple of Seti I, where I'll show you something that will turn your world upside down. Apparently, people traveled by helicopters or some kind of other flying machines in ancient Egypt. But where could this advanced technology have come from? Perhaps from space. Let's start from the very beginning. Strange hieroglyphs were discovered on the ceiling in the ancient city of Abydos. Look at them attentively, eerily. They depict something that resembles modern or even extraterrestrial vehicles, a bit too much for it to be a coincidence. No wonder some people are sure that the Abydos carvings can serve as proof of ancient astronauts having visited Egypt more than 3,000 years ago. And the ancient Egyptian artists depicted their spacecraft in the carvings on the roof, support at the Temple of Abydos. These carvings have another name, the helicopter hieroglyphs. There is an opinion that these mysterious artifacts might depict 20th century technology, or technology developed in another star system, or even a different galaxy. Now, pay closer attention to this piece. Doesn't it remind you of a helicopter, or probably even a submarine? And here, we can clearly see two planes. Or is it a UFO? In any case, none of these machines existed at the time when the hieroglyphs were carved. If we look at this whole situation from this point of view, it looks like it supports the ancient astronaut theory, which claims that intelligent extraterrestrial beings, aka alien astronauts, visited our planet and made contact with humans in ancient and prehistoric times. In this case, the hieroglyphs could be the proof of this extraterrestrial contact in the past. Some ufologists are also sure that aliens were responsible for the creation of such famous monuments as the pyramids in Egypt and Stonehenge, along with many others. Now, many people have argued that the images uploaded to the internet are fakes. But no, they are in fact real. At the same time, Egyptologists have offered a more logical explanation for the carvings in Abydos. In ancient Egypt, it was common practice for hieroglyphs to be recarved and refaced over the years. This process, known as palimpsest, was often done when a new pharaoh came to power. That's why the new ruler's name was carved over the previous one. And we have documentary evidence that this did happen at the Temple of Seti I in Abydos, particularly during the reign of his son, Ramses III. One blogger, Hypnogogial, expressed frustration with what he sees as gullibility from New Age, UFO, Atlantis enthusiasts. He explained that the roof support carvings had been started under Seti I's reign and finished by Ramses II. As a result, where Seti I's name appeared, Ramses II's carving overlapped it, and vice versa. Over time, the erosion of these carvings, combined with the overlapping hieroglyphs, created the appearance of modern machines. But in reality, those unsettling images were kinda accidental. There are people who still question this scientific theory. They claim that if the carvings are simply the result of older hieroglyphs being covered up, the symbols should appear random and unique. Several sources, including the Arab newspaper Al Sharq al-Awsat, published pictures from the Amun-Ra temple in Karnak, which show carvings strikingly similar to those found at Abydos. So, the supporters of the idea of the extraterrestrial origin of the carvings say that if those at Karnak are authentic, the palimpsest theory loses its credibility. But most likely, ufologists just see what they want to see, ignoring any scientific proof that goes against their theories. They don't want to accept the fact that erosion, as well as the phenomenon of overlapping hieroglyphs, could have easily happened at both historical sites.
An air traffic controller registers a distress call from a commercial pilot. Another call and one more. All of the calls report the same, an unidentified flying object. These alleged sightings happened between Saturday, December the 7th, and Sunday.
Pilots were claiming they had seen numerous mysterious flying objects and lights over Eugene, Oregon. After Live8c.net, which broadcasts air traffic control transmissions, published the audio recordings of the pilots' reports, this news went viral on social media platforms. The Federal Aviation Administration confirmed the sightings a few days later. They said that a pilot had reported observing unidentified lights while flying in Seattle Air Route Traffic Control Center airspace. But at the same time, the FAA didn't confirm the authenticity of the audio, making the rounds on social media. Now, if you listen to the audio attentively, you'll find out that some object was registered by air traffic control collision avoidance systems. You can also hear air traffic control informing the pilot that no military activity had been happening in the area. At 8:39 p.m. on Saturday, a United Airlines pilot said on the transmission that the lights appeared just straight west of Eugene. They saw 3 or 4 of them. What shocked the United Flight 1596 pilot the most was that the lights were all altitudes up and down, which was pretty crazy. The National UFO Reporting Center also got a report, this time from a different pilot. He overheard the chatter over air traffic control channels while landing the plane. That pilot confirmed the sightings reported over Eugene around 8:40 p.m. Soon after that, the pilot of a medical evacuation aircraft under tail number N661LF joined the conversation, announcing they had just seen another light. It zipped toward the plane and then dashed back out toward the ocean. According to the pilot's statement, the light was red and moving at an extreme speed. After receiving all these reports, air traffic control realized they needed to act fast, so they started instructing the pilots to do everything they could to avoid a collision. They cleared the planes to maneuver as necessary, left or right, to steer clear of the UFO out there. Fast forward to the following Friday, December 13th. Life Flight Network issued the following statement. On Saturday evening, December 7th, during a routine flight near Eugene, Oregon, one of our crews observed an unusual moving light in the sky. We can confirm that it was one of our pilots on the ATC recording that has been widely distributed over the last couple of days. While the nature of the light remains unidentified, at no time did it pose any safety risk to our aircraft or crew. Neither Life Flight Network nor our crew, though, are speculating about the origin or nature of the light, and our focus remains on the safe and efficient operation of our services. But the main question remains, were those bizarre moving lights alien spaceships? Well, the UFO Reporting Center doesn't support this idea. They claim that sightings like these are common, but they probably don't involve extraterrestrials visiting us. They might actually be SpaceX's Starlink satellite internet constellation. The thing is, at first, Starlink satellites move in a perfectly straight line, and most pilots know what such bright lights are and can identify them. But when the satellites get to their destination point where they're supposed to get into their final orbits, they begin moving around, doing maneuvers. That's when they can form weird formations. Often, those are shaped as triangles. Plus, these satellites can move back and forth and create patterns. Honestly, they can look pretty eerie, and tons of pilots don't know about that. So, when Starlink satellites rise high into the sky, loads of pilots report them as UFOs.
Back in December 2012, a lot of people were freaking out over the idea that the world might end in some catastrophic event. And it was all thanks to the famous Maya calendar. This ancient way of tracking time had been the subject of endless speculation. But one of its biggest mysteries was definitely an 819-day count found in some versions of the calendar. No one could explain why it was there or how it worked, until recently, when a group of researchers from Cambridge might have finally cracked the code. First things first, how does the Maya calendar work? So the system the Maya civilization used to track days was based on something we now call the calendar round. Think of it like 3 interlocking gears. These are 3 cycles working together. The first is a 365-day solar year, known as Hab. The second is a cycle of 20 names. And the third is a cycle of 13 numbers, which forms a 260-day sacred calendar, called Solkeen. Just like we'd say something like December 25th, 2025, they named their days based on how these 3 cycles lined up. For example, here we have the day 3 Manic and the 14th of the month Hop. It takes 52 years for the 3 cycles to align in the same way again. After that, the days start repeating. But this is where things start to get more complicated and mysterious. On some Mayan monuments, we have also found enigmatic inscriptions pointing to the existence of another cycle, the 819-day count. There are about 20 examples of these inscriptions, mostly found in places like Palenque and Yaxchilan in Mexico. So it didn't seem random at all, and this calendar must have been hiding a big secret. Early research showed that the 819-day cycle was represented by one of 4 colors and the cardinal directions associated with them. Black was tied to the west, red to the east, white to the north, and yellow to the south. Researchers also discovered that this period of time could be broken down into 3 smaller cycles: one of 9 days, one of 7 days, and one of 13 days. Multiply them together, and you'd get 819 days. Pretty cool, but why did they do that? This color scheme and the 3 cycles seemed like a basic level of interpretation, and experts were pretty sure its real purpose was still hidden from us. Another thing researchers noticed is that this strange count of days was mostly shown using a Y glyph followed by a number. But in some cases, they also added a glyph representing Kawil. This was a powerful Maya deity often associated with creation and lightning. He was usually symbolized by a torch coming out of his forehead, representing the spark of life. But in the 90s, a study suggested that when Kawil's inscription showed smoke and fire coming from his forehead, it could actually represent the planets Jupiter or Saturn, or maybe even both. Wait, that means that the 819 days count could be linked to both planets in some way. From there, research focused on figuring out what that link might be. The first conclusion is that this calendar might have helped the Maya track the movements of those planets in some way. Then they started noticing something interesting. These cycles could be specifically tied to the synodic periods of Jupiter and Saturn. By synodic periods, we mean the time it takes for a celestial body, like a planet, to return to the same or nearly the same position as seen from Earth. While this possibility was pretty exciting, something didn't quite add up. Each planet moves very differently, and trying to fit multiple planets into an 819-day span just didn't seem to work. In other words, this 4-part color-coded calendar system was simply too short to align perfectly with the synodic periods of the visible planets. So it looks like we're back to square one. This mystery had people scratching their heads for ages, until 2023, when specialists realized they might have been looking at it all wrong. Researchers actually needed to shift their perspective. Instead of seeing this system as 819 days, they needed to consider the number as representing timelines. And this period of time could be just a small part of a much, much bigger calendar. You see, as we said earlier, this cycle seemed to track the period when a planet became visible to people on Earth. To prove that these 819 cycles were timelines, not actual days, researchers needed a planet that could serve as a starting point to back up their theory. In this case, it was Mercury. And there's a pretty simple reason for that. Mercury's synodic period is 117 days, which fits perfectly into the calendar count. I mean, if you take 1819 and divide by 117, you get the number 7. So, Mercury is the only visible planet whose synodic cycle fits neatly into this period as whole numbers. Perfect. Now they had a solid starting point. From there, they needed to expand the calendar by increasing its length to 20 periods of 819 days. Suddenly, a pattern emerges. And just like that, all the synodic cycles of the planets fit perfectly into the system. For example, Saturn's synodic period from 378 days lines up perfectly after 6 819-day cycles. Venus aligns every 5 cycles, Jupiter every 19 cycles, and Mars, which takes the longest, needs 20 cycles. In other words, it takes about 45 years for Mars to align with the synodic periods of all visible planets. So, this is how researchers determined that the ancient civilization wasn't referring to days, but rather to timelines. The Maya astronomers came up with this count as part of a larger calendar system of 20 periods. But then a question comes up. Why was studying the synodic periods so important to the Maya? Well, we don't have super specific answers about this mysterious calendar yet. But what we can say for sure is that the Maya truly believed in the powerful influence of the cosmos on daily life. So maybe they wanted to analyze how the movements of all the visible planets lined up with their other calendars. Of course, this system is just one part of the Maya's amazing and advanced understanding of astrology. And it wasn't just about using astrological cycles for planting and harvesting. They also had crazy specific knowledge, like how to predict solar eclipses. Archaeologists believe the Maya connection to the stars is reflected in the ruins of their world. Take the famous pyramid in the ancient city of Chichen Itza, located in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. If you look closely at the base of its staircase, you will see a snake's head carved in stone. But here's the coolest part. During the spring and fall equinoxes, when day and night are exactly the same length, the sun casts sharp, triangular shadows on the staircase. It creates the illusion of a snake slithering down the steps. Another example of how they use their knowledge of astronomy in their temples is in Tikal, Guatemala. Built around year 1 of the Common Era, this pyramid is considered one of the Maya's earliest astronomical complexes. And its alignment and orientation allowed them to track and calculate solstices and equinoxes with incredible precision. The Maya were skilled skywatchers. Just like we have modern-day high-tech observatories with round domes, they had something similar. Meet El Caracol. The name means snail in Spanish and refers to the spiral staircase inside the tower. Built around 906 Common Era, it was the perfect place to observe all the changes in the sky and track the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars. Unlike us today, with our telescopes, satellites, and advanced tools, the Maya relied entirely on naked eye observation, and that makes their achievements even more incredible.
There are a few theories about how the moon appeared in the sky, and recently a new idea has popped up. But before we discuss this newcomer, let's look at the most popular hypotheses of the moon's formation. The capture theory claims that Earth's natural satellite used to be a wandering body, something like a large asteroid. It had formed somewhere else in the solar system before it was captured by our planet's gravity when passing nearby. The accretion hypothesis suggests that the moon formed in orbit around Earth at the same time as our planet appeared in the darkness of the cosmos. Then, there's the fission theory that says that at one point in its development, Earth was spinning so fast that some of its material broke away and started to orbit the planet. And the giant impact theory, which is the most popular these days, claims that the moon formed during a collision between Earth and another hypothetical planet called Theia, which was way smaller, probably the size of Mars. The resulting debris collected in an orbit around Earth and formed the moon. And now, let's move to the new theory you've been patiently waiting for. According to it, our satellite might have formed immediately, in a matter of hours, after the collision between Earth and Theia. The material from the two planets was likely launched directly into Earth's orbit right after the impact. It formed the moon and left traces deep inside Earth. In previous scenarios, Theia's remains were thought to have been scattered all over space, mixing with just a bit of the material coming from our own planet. But then, why do we see such shocking similarities between the moon's and Earth's compositions? Could it be that Theia was isotonically and chemically similar to Earth? Unlikely. But according to the new theory, more material from Earth was used to create the moon, its outer layers in particular. It might explain this similarity in composition. One more theory also tries to explain this mysterious similarity, the synestia model. According to it, our satellite formed inside a swirl of vaporized rock left by the collision. But this theory can't explain the moon's current orbit. The new single-stage theory does offer us plausible explanations for both the similarities in composition and the orbit of the moon. It might also provide us with some answers to previously unsolved mysteries. Since this scenario puts the moon into a wider orbit and gives it an interior that is not fully molten, it can explain the satellite's tilted orbit and thin crust. In any case, to confirm one of these theories, we need to analyze future lunar samples that will be brought to Earth by NASA's upcoming Artemis missions. Scientists will be able to get their hands on some material from deeper beneath the moon's surface and compare if real data matches these simulated scenarios. In the past, the Apollo missions already brought back about 1/3 of a ton of rock and soil from our satellite. These samples showed that Earth and the moon had some remarkable chemical similarities. They could only suggest one thing. These space objects had a linked history. If the moon had formed elsewhere and been captured by our planet's gravity later on, its composition would be very different from that of Earth. But if the moon had been created at the same time as Earth, or if it had broken off our planet, the type and proportion of minerals on the moon would be the same as on Earth. But they are a bit different. The moon's minerals contain less water than their terrestrial counterparts. The satellite is also richer in materials that form rapidly at high temperatures. That's why the most accepted model of the moon's formation these days is the giant impact model. Meteorites coming from the moon are a great source of data for studying the origins of our satellite too. They can tell us even more about the moon than Apollo samples, all because such meteorites come from all over the surface of the moon. Meanwhile, Apollo samples were collected just in one place near the equator, on the near side of the moon.
Right after its creation, the cosmos was shrouded in darkness. I mean, I wasn't there, but that's what most scientists are thinking. All of the stars were hidden behind a thick cloud of primordial gases. Then, all of a sudden, something cleared up this fog, and the universe started shining as it finally woke up. But how did this happen? 8 faint, recently discovered galaxies might hold the answer. The Big Bang created our world around 13.8 billion years ago. At first, it was just a super hot and chaotic boiling soup of particles. But over time, things cooled down, and particles could finally stick to each other. That's how the atoms appeared. Some helium, but mostly hydrogen, the very first element. And these first elements started creating thick gas clouds, which were very opaque. Then the first stars started forming. They were incredibly bright, emitting lots of light, including ultraviolet radiation. But even though these stars were shining, much of their light couldn't travel far because of that nasty hydrogen fog. The gas clouds absorbed and scattered any little light particles around. It was like the light was trapped around the stars. The Dark Ages lasted for hundreds of millions of years. Then, everything changed. Recently, the James Webb Space Telescope has spotted ancient dwarf galaxies from that epoch. Turns out, they're the ones we should be thanking for lighting up the universe. Back then, they were filled with early stars. These stars emitted tons of radiation that was so powerful that it managed not to just overcome, but break apart the hydrogen atoms in the fog. It turned them into charged particles, like particles that carry a little bit of electricity called ions. Little by little, the fog was cleared away. This process of clearing out the fog is called reionization, and this beautiful time is known as the epoch of reionization. Finally, the light was able to travel to all corners of the universe, which was a game changer, just like humans' Age of Enlightenment. To find these little igniters, astronomers used a technique called gravitational lensing. Imagine light traveling through space like a straight beam. But just like everything in our world, even time, light obeys gravity. If it's too strong, it'll literally bend the light beams. So when the beams pass near a massive object, the object's gravity pulls on them, curling and twisting their path. That's why black holes look so creepy, as they stretch stars and space around them like some whirlpools. But it's not that creepy. A regular glass or magnifying glass does something similar, hence the name gravitational lensing. When the lensing object is horrifyingly massive, it bends the light into multiple images of the same object, creating a creepy and mesmerizing structure called an Einstein ring. But if it's not that big, then the bending is less dramatic, and it just slightly distorts the shape of the background object, making it look kinda stretched. Gravitational lensing also helps scientists study things like the spooky dark matter. If the light looks stretched, and it's not just because of some obvious massive objects nearby, then it might be something invisible and heavy bending it. Since these 8 galaxies were too faint, no wonder they're almost as old as my unread emails. Scientists had to use these gravity tricks to observe them. The team studied light from galaxies that are over 13 billion years old. Finally, they focused on a galaxy cluster called Abell 2744, also known as Pandora's Cluster. And these findings helped them understand how even little fellas played a huge role in transforming the early universe. The James Webb Telescope is an incredible tool, and soon it might help us look at even earlier times, at the cosmic dawn, when the universe was only several millions of years old. Another great tool, called the Roman Space Telescope, is going to help it. It's also possible that these galaxies weren't the only helpers in this entire saga. These early massive stars were absolutely terrifying. They just don't make them like that anymore. Some estimates suggest they were 30 to 300 times more massive than our Sun, and millions of times brighter. Modern stars have some heavier elements in them, but back then, they used only the stuff available, hydrogen and helium, which is why they were so hot and shiny. But they also had very short lifespans, lasting just a few million years. For example, our Sun is 4.6 billion years old and is still going strong, thankfully. At the end of their lives, they went supernova. These colorful bursts of energy were so strong that they forged the first heavier elements in our world and spread them across the universe, planting first seeds for the future planets. Meanwhile, the stars themselves didn't just disappear. They collapsed under their own gravity, creating the first black holes. Now, the black holes are also known for producing insane amounts of radiation, so it's possible that they might have helped speed up the clearing of the fog. Ironically, they help the universe shine brighter while sucking up the light at the same time. Recent discoveries show that black holes might be much older than we used to believe. They probably helped new stars and galaxies form. They were millions or even billions of times the mass of the Sun. The James Webb Telescope has already found a pair of early quasars. That's what we call the bright centers of galaxies powered by supermassive black holes. It's a curious pair of quasars that are merging just 900 million years after the Big Bang. This might be the earliest and most distant pair of merging quasars ever found. The telescope has also been studying things that are called cosmic lighthouses. In scientific language, they're pulsars. Pulsars are super-dense remnants of massive stars. They form from stars that were once 4 to 8 times more massive than our Sun. One of the greatest things about them is how fast they spin. They're one of the fastest objects in the universe. They might do around 700 rotations in just 1 second. They got their name because they behave like lighthouses, basically flickering radio waves. These beams of radiation sweep across the sky, creating a pulse-like signal that we detect. Now, a star basically works like this. There's nuclear fusion happening inside of its core. Atoms get fused in each other, move at crazy speeds, bump, all meanwhile releasing an unbelievable amount of energy. That's why they emit tons of light and heat. Of course, all this pressure tries to push outward, sweating like crazy to expand a star. The greatest the fusion is, the more powerful and insane the star gets. On the other hand, there's gravity that's pulling inward, trying to compress the star and keep it a nice small dense ball. As long as there's balance, the star keeps living, but when it gets old and spends all of its nuclear fuel, it becomes too weak to generate the energy it needs and can't fight against gravity anymore. That's when it basically collapses under its own weight, going supernova. What's left behind is the star's core, but now it's crushed down to an incredibly small size, about 12 to 17 miles across. It's roughly the size of a city. This dense core is known as a neutron star. The material in a neutron star is so dense that just a teaspoon of it would weigh as much as 4 billion tons, like 10,000 Empire State Buildings. And all this collapse sets off a trigger, causing the neutron star to spin super fast, creating a pulsar. It's kind of like when an ice skater spins faster when they pull their arms in. Pulsars often have a smaller star friend orbiting them, although it's not always a friendly relationship. Not long ago, astronomers discovered a pulsar that was surrounded by lots of energetic material for some reason. They realized that all this material was the remnants of another much larger star. Turns out, the pulsar had been slowly destroying its friend with its terrifying radiation and particles until it basically ate the neighbor away. It's similar to how a black widow spider consumes its mate. So, systems like this were called black widow pulsars. In any case, these lighthouses most likely help the reionization process as well. A long time ago, they could be very energetic stars in small galaxies and could emit enough radiation to transform the early universe. The James Webb Telescope's mission is to find more of these lighthouses and see what role they played in the universe's evolution. Okay, I officially give up on the hope that the moon is made of cheese after all. Wow, not even Gouda. The shiny lunar ball, or a curved banana, or half of a coin, depending on what phase it's in, has different layers inside, just like Earth. One of these layers is called the inner core. About 20 years ago, scientists were observing how the moon rotates. Using that data, they concluded that it had a fluid outer core. But the inner core was hard to study, so they didn't know if it was solid like a rock or molten like a hot liquid. But things are clearer now. Astronomers have collected data from different missions, including the Apollo missions, where astronauts went to the moon and gathered information themselves. Plus, they've used a special technique called seismic data. This method is all about studying how sound waves move through things. Take earthquakes on our planet as an example. When an earthquake happens, it creates waves that travel through the ground. Scientists can detect and analyze these waves to learn more about Earth's interior. The same idea can apply to other objects in our solar system, or planets, or, in this case, the moon. When quakes or moonquakes happen, they generate sound waves, and by carefully listening to and studying these waves, scientists can create a detailed map of what's inside the object. They can figure out things like different layers, what they're made of, and how they're arranged. To check the moon's deep interior, scientists also use something called laser ranging. This method measures the distance between the surface of the Earth and the moon very precisely. And ta-da! Our natural satellite's inner core is a dense, solid ball made of iron, just like Earth's. It's about 310 miles wide, which is nearly 15% the size of the entire moon. Researchers also have stumbled upon evidence that supports the theory that the layer between the moon's surface and its core, called the mantle, has been moving around as the moon evolved over time. This movement is something we call lunar mantle overturn, and it could explain why we find elements rich in iron on the lunar surface. Mantle material ends up being carried upward, and the volcanic rock remains in the moon's crust. Some of the materials in this rock were too dense, like me, so they just sank back through the lighter crust material all the way to the core mantle boundary. It's like a cycle where the moon's mantle material goes up during volcanic activity, carries iron-rich elements to the surface, and then sinks back down. There's another mystery scientists have been trying to solve: what caused the moon's magnetic field to weaken and nearly disappear over time? It seems that now that we know about the iron core and the global mantle overturn, we might get some more answers about the moon's magnetic field. Knowing what the inner core is like can help us better understand the Moon's history as well as the history of our entire solar system. Now, one of the theories that's widely accepted about the origin of the Moon says there was a massive collision between Earth, in its early stages, and another mysterious object in our solar system. It's called the Large Impact Theory, and this collision was so strong it ripped off a big chunk of the primitive molten Earth. I mean, not so big compared to what's left. If you put a US nickel next to a green pea, you get a good idea of how big our planet is compared to the Moon. Now, this chunk was set into orbit around our planet, and this might have happened about 95 million years after our solar system formed. The object that collided with Earth could have been about 10% the mass of our home planet and roughly the size of Mars. Well, it makes sense. Earth and the Moon do have similar compositions after all. Of course, there are other ideas about how the Moon formed. One says that the gravitational force of our planet captured it. This means that the Moon was just an object innocently passing by when suddenly it got attracted and pulled into Earth's orbit. There's even a hypothesis that Earth stole the Moon from Venus. Ooh. In that case, the Moon shouldn't complain. I guess the view is way better here. So yeah, the Moon and Earth are similar when it comes to rocks and some minerals. But the Moon doesn't have the same atmosphere as our planet. Its atmosphere is thin and consists of some weird gases that include potassium and sodium, which is not something you can find in the atmosphere of Mars, Venus, or Earth. And the rocks on the Moon don't contain water, but that doesn't mean there's no water at all up there. A long time ago, in the 17th century, astronomers saw large dark spots on the Moon's surface. One of these astronomers thought these spots looked like oceans, and he called them maria, which means seas in Latin. Other astronomers also made maps of the Moon, and they used the term maria to describe these dark spots. For example, Mare Tranquillitatis translates to Sea of Tranquility, where Apollo 11 made its touchdown. But it seems those dark spots are not actually oceans. They are plains made of hardened lava that erupted long ago. These volcanic eruptions left behind smooth flat areas called basalt plains. In the late 1800s, one sky watcher studied the Moon and found it didn't have an atmosphere. Without an atmosphere, there are no clouds and no air to keep water from evaporating. So scientists thought that any water on the Moon would just disappear right away. They believed the Moon was totally dry. But then, in 1961, one physicist had a different idea. He pointed out there could be water on the Moon in special areas called permanently shadowed regions. These are spots on the Moon where the sun doesn't shine, so they stay dark all the time. Water ice could exist in these dark areas because they're extremely cold and the ice wouldn't evaporate. But when astronauts from the Apollo missions went to the Moon, they brought back soil samples, and scientists found no signs of water in them. So everyone went back to thinking that the Moon was completely dry. In the 90s, NASA focused on these shadowed craters and found high concentrations of hydrogen, which meant there could be ice at the Moon's poles. They still weren't certain, so they kept digging and, after a while, found hydrogen trapped inside tiny beads of volcanic glass. Since there are no active volcanoes on the Moon today, which means water probably was present on the Moon when these volcanoes erupted long ago. Plus, there could be way more water back in the early days of our Moon. In 2020, NASA's SOFIA mission showed us what we'd been looking for a really long time. There is water on the Moon after all. It turns out the water is hidden within the grains of lunar dust or sticking to the surface in the sunlit areas of the Moon. So there are no oceans like we have on Earth, but at least there's something. The question remains, how did water even get there? It seems the Moon had a chaotic history back at the time when it was forming, as probably most of the planets and moons in our solar system. So there is some evidence that water came there from comets hitting its surface back in the old days, or maybe even keeps on coming from those that are slamming into the Moon right now. We're talking about a chaotic situation where icy micrometeorites collide with the Moon's surface, and dust then makes an even bigger mess when interacting with the solar wind. But we're waiting to find out more about this. Because, as we all know, when you mention water, you also inevitably talk about life. That's why we want to know more, for instance, about all that ice hidden in polar craters on the moon. Maybe it can teach us more about how life developed on Earth. Maybe comets brought all the necessary elements here. Then, what if there are some of those elements stuck in the ice on the moon, too?
Our moon exploration project started out in 1969. Sure, there have been some problems along the way, but astronomers are certain we'll get back up there pretty soon and with better knowledge and technology. However, there's an 800-year-old trick that might become way more useful than fancy GPS tech and powerful rockets. It's called the Fibonacci sphere. Some scientists at a Hungarian university stumbled upon this idea while studying the moon. They believe it might be useful to better understand how the moon spins and how it's a bit squished while it goes around Earth. You might believe that our planet and its satellite are these perfect little spheres floating in space. Well, that's not true. They are in fact like slightly deflated soccer balls because of all the gravity, rotating movements, and tides. The GPS technology we use here on Earth is already adapted to these less than perfect ball proportions. Remember, our planet is a bit flattened at its poles. If we're going to make a map system for the moon, we need to do the same for its shape, called a solenoid, or what scientists call the moon's version of our Earth's shape. Since the moon is less compressed than our planet, scientists have been taking a shortcut until now. They've been looking at our satellite as a simple ball shape. However, with all these new projects coming up in the following decades and even some exciting trips we might end up having on the moon, we need to be more precise. Scientists now believe we should get the real data and start drawing an accurate picture of the moon. Here's where the Fibonacci sphere comes in handy. It's a clever solution that's been used by mathematicians to spread points out evenly on a ball. Scientists recently used it to map around 100,000 spots on the moon using data previously collected by NASA. And what they found was crucial for our understanding of the moon's shape. For instance, we now know that our satellite's poles are about 0.3 miles closer to the center compared to the moon's equator. Sure, it might seem like a tiny detail, but if we adjust our GPS software accordingly before we land on the moon again, it might save us from getting lost up there. This level of math hasn't been done since the 60s for the moon, but we already know it works wonders here at home, so it only makes scientists better prepared for future missions. This isn't the first time people have used Fibonacci's findings to come up with clever solutions. We've also seen it put to work in finance, agriculture, and in computer science. Let's see where it all came from. Legend has it that the Italian mathematician Fibonacci wasn't really that interested in mathematical sequences at first, but rather in rabbits? So, he came up with this interesting puzzle. What happens if you place a pair of rabbits in a certain space for a year? He also set some theoretical rules. For starters, all those bunnies come in boy-girl pairs, and they can start reproducing after just a month. Each month, each bunny pair adds one more pair of bunny offspring. The last rule was that all bunnies would be invincible for the year. Doing the math, he got this series of numbers. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on. If you look at this series again, you'll notice that every number is the sum of the two before it. The first two, that's your starting bunny pair. Next, you'll see the number 2, which is the first pair and their first offspring pair. Word caught on about this interesting sequence, and math lovers began studying it more closely. They started seeing this pattern very often in nature, like in how leaves grow on a plant or how seeds arrange on sunflowers. There's even a little experiment you can do to check it out. Start by grabbing some paper and a pen. Try drawing the Fibonacci spiral. Start with a tiny circle, then go bigger and bigger using those Fibonacci numbers. The first circle should just be a tiny dot on the paper, or the equivalent of 0. Next circle, 1 unit. Another circle, still 1 unit. Keep it going and you'll see that the circles form this spiral pattern. Even as it continues to grow, it keeps its shape. You might have also stumbled upon the Fibonacci spiral as a symbol of hypnosis. In all fairness, there's little evidence you can confuse someone by making them stare into a spiral for a while. But its effects on our focus and our optic nerves can't be ignored. After you've stared at a spinning spiral, you might see how objects get smaller or bigger depending on the direction of the swirl. It's easy to understand why some experience this sensation as hypnotizing. This interesting series of numbers appears in our day-to-day lives, even if we don't notice it. It can also be used in more practical instances, like converting miles to kilometers. Let's look at the series 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Pick any two numbers side by side. Say 13 and 21. Do the calculations and you'll notice that 13 miles is about 21 kilometers. Same with 34 and 55. Music and math might not seem like they're connected. But if you had asked the great Mozart, he probably wouldn't have agreed. It seems he was very passionate about numbers from early on in his career. He loved finding cool number patterns in music, like some sort of hidden messages. His own sister even remembered him doodling math all the time, even on the sides of his music sheets. Some scholars believe he might have even played around with the Fibonacci numbers. If that's really the case, then he might have used the ration to balance out parts of his tunes. What about other types of art? Well, it's also said that Leonardo da Vinci used the golden ratio in his masterpieces, like the Vitruvian Man and the Mona Lisa. Also, when it comes to great pieces of architecture, the Parthenon might have used this pattern too. Anytime you see buildings with columns spaced just right, you can be certain that's where the builders drew inspiration from. The Great Pyramid of Giza is another great example. There's no official record to prove it, but the pyramid's shape is so close to the golden ratio that it's kind of obvious. You'll also see this pattern appearing naturally in our environment. Go out in our garden and check to see if you have any pine cones lying around. See those scales? They're set up in a pattern according to the Fibonacci sphere. Even the bones in our body seem to be growing based on the same proportions. We've got one torso, one head, and one heart. Then there's stuff that comes in pairs. Our arms, legs, eyes, and ears, for instance. For the number 3, think about the composition of our limbs and the 3 main sections in our hand. The wrist part, the middle palm part, and our fingers, which are also split into 3, by the way. Oh, speaking of fingers, their bone lengths have this ratio too. This design helps our fingers move smoothly, especially when grabbing objects. The Fibonacci sequence can be seen in the way ocean waves curve, and how rivers split and flow too. Weather patterns can also follow this rule. Some whirlpools and hurricanes form and spread out in the same way the Fibonacci spiral does. Zoom out, and you'll see that spirals aren't just found here on Earth. They're also everywhere in space, and it isn't random. Most galaxies, including our Milky Way, are spirals. Think of it like this. Generally, stars in a young galaxy don't all appear at once. Some are faster when developing, others take their time. This makes gravity pull in different ways, making the young galaxy spin like a disk. As it spins, different levels of gravity stretch it into getting these spiral arms. On the flip side, if all the stars in a young galaxy appear at the same time, gravity just smushes it all into an egg shape, or what the astronomers call elliptical.
Hey, look at this rock. At first sight, it looks like a regular boring rock, the likes of which you can see when walking along the beach. Its color doesn't stand out, and its weight is pretty regular, around 4 pounds. But everything changes when you learn that this rock was born on Mars, traveled all the way to Earth, and ended up in Antarctica. Ah, now the story sounds much more fascinating. So let's find out the details. Researcher Roberta Score, who worked on the ANSMET project, which stands for Antarctic Search for Meteorites, of the Denver Antarctic Program, found this meteorite in 1984. If you want to decipher the name of the space traveler, I can help you. It comes from the place where the scientists spotted it, the Allen Hills of Antarctica, hence ALH. And then we've got the year of the discovery and the number of the sample. If you think that Roberta picked up the rock and exclaimed something like, "Woohoo, I'm holding a chunk of Mars," I'll have to disappoint you. At the very beginning, it was totally unclear where the meteorite came from. And one thing confused researchers even more. The meteor was very different from other meteorite groups found on our planet. Okay, but then, How did they finally figure out it was a visitor from Mars? All thanks to traces of gas similar to those that make up the atmosphere of the red planet. We learned about its composition thanks to the brave Viking lander that carried out the necessary analysis in situ in 1976. Anyway, back to our rocky discovery. It's actually very special, and not only because the rock arrived from far, far away. Among those several thousand meteorites found on Earth, just around 100 have likely come from Mars. And even so, our guy is different from them and seems to be part of a separate group. So let's go into the past and follow the life story of this cosmic traveler. It most likely formed around 4 billion years ago on its home red planet. One day, which wasn't very different from others, turned out to be life-changing for this peaceful rock. A meteorite impact catapulted into space, and it started its own journey as a small asteroid. At that time, it was way larger than at the moment of discovery on Earth. At one point, ALH got close to Earth and, who knows, probably decided to explore something. That's how, 13,000 years ago, it ended its space journey by colliding with our planet. At the moment, this Martian fragment is the oldest we've got. But at first, it wasn't all that popular. Only in 1996 did it become way more famous after a groundbreaking discovery. You see, some NASA researchers started wondering, well, the fragment is obviously very old, but then, could it have recorded any traces of life that could have been thriving on Mars at the time ALH formed on the red planet? And guess what? Those scientists turned out to be right. They detected traces of very fine magnetite particles. Those were completely similar in structure and chemical composition to the particles we have on Earth. They're called magnetofossils, and magnetotactic bacteria produce them. So it might mean that, at one point, there were some forms of life on Mars. In April 2020, scientists from the Japanese Space Agency made another discovery. They detected nitrogen containing organic material of Martian origin in our meteorite. So, who knows what new astounding secrets further examination of the meteorite might reveal? At the moment, though, all you can do is travel to Antarctica and find more of them. The thing is, this place is great for meteorite hunting. Surprisingly, we have found nearly 50,000 meteorites in Antarctica, and hundreds of thousands are still waiting to be discovered. Each of these space rocks can tell us a story of the evolution of the solar system. For example, the very first lunar rock found on the icy deserted continent proved that chunks of space objects larger than asteroids can also end up on Earth. So, let's say you got inspired and decided to go meteorite hunting all the way to Antarctica. Well, get ready for some serious challenges. Despite their potential abundance, finding space rocks isn't as easy as it might seem. You'll have to visit remote areas, and there's still no guarantee that you'll be able to spot a meteorite. And that's actually a huge problem. Meteorites are vanishing from sight. Currently, scientists find about 1,000 meteorites in Antarctica each year. But according to a new study, about 5,000 more get hidden out of sight every year. The culprit is warming temperatures. Worried scientists created a model that could help them figure out where those meteorites might surface. This model was quite complicated, taking into consideration snow cover, surface temperature, the speed at which ice flows, and even the steepness of the terrain. After that, they ran simulations under various warming scenarios. It turned out that meteorites indeed sank out of sight as temperatures rose. To say that the researchers were upset is obvious. They didn't expect that climate change would affect their work so much. Even though those areas are below freezing, people still managed to ruin a crucial archive of the solar system. But let's get back to your meteorite hunt. If you want your chances to find one to be higher, travel to the base of mountains or outcrops where ice, which usually flows to the lower ground, is forced to move upward. But make sure to take your windbreaker with you. In those places, powerful winds brush away snow, exposing bright, vivid blue ice. Instead of melting, this ancient ice can change directly into water vapor, and it helps expose meteorites that would otherwise remain hidden. You need to hurry though. Meteorites at the surface disappear quickly. Even when temperatures are well below freezing, the rocks can still absorb some of the sun's heat and melt the ice. It's like they're creating underground, or shall I say under ice, tunnels for themselves, sinking and hiding from sight. Sometime later, refreezing closes the entrance to those tunnels, effectively trapping meteorites inside, tucked out of sight. Now, scientists admit it's very tricky to find working methods to spot meteorites, and if we don't hurry and develop such methods, we might lose between 80,000 and 250,000 space rocks in total. No wonder scientists are on a mission to find more meteorites. They're focusing on meteorite stranding zones. Those are places where meteorites often gather on the surface because of specific features of geology, ice flow, and climate conditions. As you already know, you can find meteorites on blue ice without snow cover. This makes meteorites easy to spot. But finding such hotspots is often pure luck. Or you gotta sit day and night, scouring maps and satellite images in attempts to spot blue ice zones near research stations. Let me introduce Veronika Tolanov, a glaciologist, and her team. They've taken things to the next level by developing a smart Antarctic-wide map. To do it, they've used machine learning and satellite data from NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, and others. This map highlights areas where meteorites might be hiding based on past finds and all kinds of climate and ice data. Apparently, the best places to find meteorites are along the edges of the continent and near mountains with blue ice. Unfortunately, it's not just the blue ice that matters. The temperature and speed of the ice flow are also super important. For example, if the ice flows too quickly, meteorites get swept away before they can accumulate. So, if you want to find a meteorite, you have to wait for very precise conditions. The surface temperature has to stay below 16 degrees Fahrenheit almost all the time. Otherwise, meteorites sink. You can start with the Allen Hills region. Yup, that's where our ALH friend was discovered. This area is kind of a meteorite gold mine with more than 1,000 finds. But there are even more promising places, like the Fimbulheimen Mountains, and no one has searched there yet. You might be the first. In any case, with this new map, researchers developed a where-to-go index that ranks the best meteorite hunting spots, making future field trips much more targeted. And with plenty of blue ice regions still unexplored, there are tons of meteorites just waiting to be found. So, what do you